Hello everyone, this is your friend from Naruto Audio Fanfics, and we are back once again with a brand new fanfic. Which is What If Naruto and Tsubaki's story began with one look and changed destiny, featuring Tsubaki, Hinata, Sakura, Ino, Tenten, Anko and Kurenai, Part 1. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to hit the like button, thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing Naruto fanfics like this. So without wasting any more time, let's start today's fanfic. Naruto Uzumaki was sitting by himself on his usual swing in the academy playground, staring down sadly. Heartbroken and frustrated at yet his third failed attempt to complete the genin graduation exam, the blonde whisker-faced youth didn't have the energy or the enthusiasm to do anything else. Why does that one jutsu trip me up every time? He asked himself in his frustration. As he sat there sadly, he couldn't help but overhear the conversations that the other kids in his class were having with their parents and families. Ha ha, passed it with flying colors. They called me first. I'm a genin. I wish your grandma were here to see this. I'm proud of you, son. We all are. Congratulations. I'm going to cook all your favorites tonight. We'll have a feast. This only served to remind Naruto of just how lonely he was. There was no family there to comfort him or let him know that everything would be okay. What made him even sadder was that even if he had passed, there would be nobody there to congratulate him, either. It was with these thoughts in mind that a particular conversation found its way into Naruto's ears. There, do you see him? Asked a feminine voice that was laced with a spiteful edge. It's that boy. I hear he's the only one who failed, another female voice responded. This one with not as sharp an edge, but rather laced with what seemed to be nervous fascination. Naruto now knew that they were talking about him. He raised his glance to see who they were. HMPH. Well, it serves him right, the spiteful woman responded back. Naruto noticed that this woman had the darker hair of the two, and had what appeared to be some kind of shawl wrapped around her forehead. She, like her companion, was dressed in the garb of a typical housewife, simple utilitarian dress with a shirt on underneath it. The scowl on her face gave one the impression that it was the usual expression she wore. The other woman responded, just imagine if he became a ninja, I mean, he's the boy who. Shish. The spiteful woman interrupted quickly, we're not allowed to talk about that. What are they talking about? What did I do? Why do people keep staring and glaring at me like that? He thought to himself at what he overheard, his frustration now giving way to hurt and anger at the unfairness of it all. He picked his gaze up and looked directly at the two women who were quietly deriding him, making direct eye contact with one of them. He noticed that this woman was the prettier of the two. It was clear that she was a civilian, but given her slender build, one couldn't help but wonder if she might have at one time been a kunoichi. Her hair was brown also, but of a lighter shade than her companions, and her head was unadorned. She wore a scowl that was similar to the spiteful woman's scowl, but wasn't quite so pronounced. Unlike the other woman, the nervous woman's scowl looked like it didn't belong there. As he continued looking right at her, he noticed a change in her posture and expression when they made eye contact. Tsubaki Kenpi kept her peace at her friend Abara's sharp reminder about the law regarding that boy. She knew what he was. She knew what he carried inside him, and she, like so many others, was content to act as though he didn't exist. Every time she saw that boy in the village, she was reminded of that horrible night, the night that she, like so many others, had lost so many loved ones to the nine-tailed fox's horrific attack. She had married young, as many kunoichi were wont to do. At the tender age of 13, her husband, who had been 5 years older than her, was a newly promoted junin on the night the nine-tailed fox had attacked. The attack left her husband dead, and her alone to raise her 2-month-old daughter Kasumi by herself. She had just made chunin at that time after 4 years in the shinobi program. She had been a member of the last class to graduate early due to war. She'd had to retire so that she could raise her child, and her life had not been easy. Fortunately for her, when Sarutobi retook the mantle of Hokage, he had set up a fund for those who had been orphaned or widowed and made into single parents as a result of the catastrophe that struck the village. Tsubaki knew Abara had it just as bad, but Abara had become much more embittered about how her life had turned out since that night. Abara had never been particularly compassionate anyway, having been a bit of a bully during her academy years, a path that her daughter, Amy, seemed to follow her in. As much as it saddened Tsubaki, she knew that Abara would likely never change, and probably didn't want to. She, on the other hand, had always wanted to be a medical field ninja, as she preferred helping people to hurting them. She remembered reading about the legendary Lady Tsunade's illustrious career as a genius medic and ninja during her time in the academy, but what had intrigued her the most was Tsunade's proposal during the Second Great Shinobi War to institute a medical ninja in every squad. Tsubaki, herself, thought that this was an ingenious idea, and she never really understood why the idea was never adopted. If it had been, who knows how many lives could have been saved on the night of the Nine Tails attack. It was shortly after this last thought that she noticed Naruto looking right at her. Her first impulse was to glare at him, but after a moment of looking directly into his eyes, she saw something she'd never seen before. Those blue eyes were so full of sadness, pain, loneliness, to the point of almost complete isolation. Then she saw even more frustration and anger that stemmed from the sadness, pain, and loneliness that he felt. She'd seen those things in her own eyes so many times when she looked into a mirror. It was terrible to feel those things. It was even worse to recognize them when you looked into your own eyes. It made you wonder what others saw when they really looked at you. She always felt exposed when she saw those things in herself, but this was different. She never saw those feelings to such an immense degree in her own eyes. Her face morphed into a confused, saddened frown, before settling into an ashamed one. She averted her eyes from the boy, unable to continue meeting his gaze anymore before she decided to look around for her own daughter. When Kasumi had come up to her, she gave her a phony smile and congratulated her, Kasumi being none the wiser as to what was really going on in her mother's heart and mind. Abara had done the same with Amy when she had approached, although her smile and praise seemed more genuine than Tsubaki's had been. They all walked away to celebrate their daughter's accomplishment, but Tsubaki sent one last look Naruto's way, making eye contact briefly once more, seeing something different this time, confusion and recognition. She quickly put it aside as she saw Mizuki-sensei making his way to Naruto, intent on talking to him about something. Naruto became confused as the woman's face seemed to change. It started with a glare, but then turned into a frown. She became confused, then sad, then she seemed to avert her gaze. Is she ashamed? And of what? She can't be ashamed of what she just said about me, can she? Nobody's ever been ashamed of that, he thought to himself in genuine confusion, trying to solve the puzzle just presented before him. She's probably just ashamed of acknowledging my existence. The rest of the village would rather I wasn't around, so that's got to be it, he thought bitterly, believing he had solved his mystery. Some prompting within him, however, told him to continue watching this woman. He didn't know what it was, and looking back, he could only chalk it up to her abnormal reaction to making eye contact with him. When most made eye contact with him, they usually glared icily, or angrily, but never guiltily. What made this woman so different? Naruto watched with confused interest as one of his classmates, Kasumi, made her way to the woman, telling her, "Mom, how she graduated and how well she did on the Genin exam." She was with her friend Amy, who made her way to the spiteful woman and had the same conversation with her. So that's where Amy gets it, huh? Naruto thought rhetorically. Returning his attention to Kasumi and her mother, Naruto just continued watching. Mom's smile and praise of her daughter seemed forced, as though her guilt was really bothering her. Naruto couldn't wrap his head around it. Why would that be? As they left the grounds, Mom glanced back Naruto's way once more. Naruto's interest gave way to recognition. He could see it in her eyes. She knew how he felt, and it was that realization that made her feel ashamed. He was still a bit confused. After all, how many others looked him in the eye and didn't care? How many others reacted the same way Ami's mother did, believing that it served him right to fail and be alone? His attention was diverted by his silver-haired Chunin instructor's voice calling his name. It was a fact that word spread quickly throughout the Hidden Leaf village about, well, anything of interest to anybody. It became widely known throughout adult circles that Naruto had been tricked by Mizuki that night into stealing the forbidden scroll of sealing. If some rumors were to be believed, he had learned an A-rank forbidden kinjutsu from the scroll before being caught, and eventually used it to save Iruka-sensei's life. As a result, he had been allowed to graduate, and for some reason, this had made Tsubaki smile. It made her smile even further when she heard that he was on the first genin squad that Kakashi Hatake, of all people, had passed and taken on. It was as though Kami herself was giving the boy a break, as well as some vindication, from the labels and the treatment that people had given him, people like herself. Shame and guilt would come anew when she remembered how she used to treat him. She just couldn't get those haunted, lonely eyes out her mind. As it was right now, she was going to and fro within the village, running errands here and there. Kasumi hadn't passed her Junin sensei's test, and was now currently repeating her final year at the academy with her best friend Amy. Since Sasuke Uchiha had graduated, Kasumi no longer seemed as focused as she was before, as though her reason for being there was now gone. Tsubaki feared for her daughter, and for Amy. She knew all too well that fangirls usually didn't last long as kunoichi. Time and time again, she had seen or heard tale of fangirls being captured, abused, raped and killed, all the while, expecting and praying that their knight in shining armor would come and rescue them. She certainly didn't want Kasumi or Amy to end up like that. She only hoped that she and Obara could talk their daughters out of this phase they were going through before it was too late. Right now, the chances of that happening looked pretty bleak, mostly because Obara and Amy weren't really on good talking terms since she failed her genin test. Kasumi usually went in whatever direction Amy went. Amy just had that kind of presence. If she could focus her efforts and attentions constructively towards becoming a true kunoichi, she would likely do very well, becoming Chunin quickly. Amy could lead people, of that there was little doubt, it was just that she usually led them in bullying others. There he was again, that boy, Naruto. She just watched as he and his two teammates suffered through a D-rank mission, walking the Inuzuka dogs. It would seem that whenever Naruto got involved in something, he jumped in with both feet. He was walking 4 dogs at once, all of which were as big as him or bigger. Now that she thought about it, any time she had seen him around in the months since he graduated, he always seemed to work that hard. He would use shadow clones to help with cleanup work, he would pull a greater load in each mission than the other two, he would also work with more enthusiasm and energy. It was as though he had something to prove. She gasped at that. Is this what we've driven him to? Does he work so hard to prove himself, just so we'll acknowledge his existence? It was with that question in mind that she began looking around, seeing if anyone was paying him any mind or attention. She saw that they were paying him more attention than they were his teammates, but it was the kind of attention that they were paying him that struck her. People were looking at him with cold, icy glares, the occasional exception being a hate-filled, scornful glare from someone who felt more strongly towards him than most. This just feels so wrong, he's just a kid. He doesn't deserve this. He's never done anything to hurt any of these people. This thought led to another guilt-filled realization, and not too long ago, I was no different. How would I feel in his shoes, with everyone in the village glaring at me like that day in and day out? How can he stand it? She took a few moments to observe him a little more closely. She saw his posture and the look in his eyes, even through the goofy grin followed by the occasional teeth-gritting grunt as he was walking several very strong dogs. She could see that Naruto was aware of every glare and every ill intention being sent his way. And yet, he wasn't reacting. Curious as to why this was, she continued to observe and watch him. At that moment, Naruto's gaze caught her own once more. That same flicker of recognition was there in his eyes. He remembered her. She almost averted her gaze as she felt her guilt and shame rising to the surface once more, but she squelched it, and offered him a weak smile and a small nod instead. Naruto frowned in what seemed to be confusion at this before being taken off his feet by his current mission and dragged through the streets, both his teammates yelling at him all the while. I wonder why she smiled at me this time, Naruto mused to himself after the dogs he was walking had finally stopped dragging him. Sakura had already bonked him on the head for being his typical knuckleheaded self and making their mission take longer, while Sasuke just smirked and gave him the typical barbs, loser, dead last, idiot. Thinking about her smile, which he found to be quite becoming, now that he thought about it, brought a genuine smile to his face. It wasn't often that he received smiles from the villagers, and he found the experience to be quite pleasant, to say the least. Upon hearing his teammates calling his name, he pasted his phony grin back on his face before turning his attention to them and running in their direction so that they could get paid. Tsubaki had heard the most astonishing rumor, and was dying to verify the truth of it. That Naruto boy was involved in the defeat of an A-rank rogue ninja, and one of the 7 ninja swordsmen to boot. Apparently, he played a pretty major role in it, too. As she talked with people and listened in on others, there was one thing that she noticed, and she was noticing it more and more these days. Whenever there was a rumor of Naruto doing something good or performing some great deed, the almost habitual response was disbelief. It was annoying her to no end. These people couldn't claim to know Naruto any better than she did. But here they were, jumping to the conclusion that Naruto couldn't have had anything to do with performing a service for the village. It was always about how he was a loser, or no good, or whatever the current nonsense happened to be. When Tsubaki had gotten home from running her day-to-day errands, she sat down in her living room and thought to herself, is that how I used to be? Was I that bad? Did I talk about him the same way? I don't remember saying too much about him, and I used to avoid talking about him or thinking about him, but, when I did, was I saying the kinds of things that these people are saying, now? As she pondered this, she found she didn't like the idea of having been that judgmental. Any time she saw him out and about now, she would offer a smile to him, and that simple gesture seemed to make his day. While grateful that she could be of such help to him, the wrongness of the whole situation bothered her. If a warm, friendly smile did that much for him, she was reminded of the hard truth that he didn't get that many friendly smiles, and from what she could see, he was a very friendly young man. She would see him spending time with the honorable grandson and his 2 friends, and even giving them some training in the form of playing ninja. She had a few chances to listen to some of the advice that Naruto offered them from time to time, and was rather astounded at how wise his advice was. The villagers were wrong about him. She had been wrong about him, and it was time that she did her part to try to put things right, or to at least clear up the labels and misconceptions that he had been unfairly given. She would make it a point from here on to either avoid such conversation, or in situations where it was unavoidable, to attempt to correct such errant viewpoints where she could. This kid's amazing. Time and time again, he seems to pull major upsets and accomplish the impossible. Tsubaki thought to herself as she just heard the latest. Naruto, the major underdog in the Chunin exam preliminaries, had defeated his opponent Kiba Inuzuka. It would seem that Naruto always would be the #1 unpredictable ninja in the Hidden Leaf Village, whether for good or ill, whether because of his ability to pull off the most insane pranks imaginable or to make seemingly impossible situations reality. It was with this in mind that her eye caught the boy once more, eating lunch at Ichiraku's ramen stand, and he was with someone. Wait a minute, isn't that Master Jiraiya, the Toad Sage? I wonder what Naruto's doing with him, she mused, intrigued by what she saw. Apparently, the 2 of them were just finishing lunch as she saw them paying their bill. All right, kid, back to it, she heard Jiraiya exclaim with gusto. Naruto groaned in response, muttering something about lazy perverts being no help in training at all. It then occurred to Tsubaki, Jiraiya was training Naruto. This brought an astonished, yet grateful smile to her lips. It was great for Naruto that someone finally seemed to be taking a positive, proactive interest in him, and it was even better that the interested party was none other than Master Jiraiya, arguably the strongest hidden leaf ninja alive. As she walked off, she once again made eye contact with Naruto, and once again, there was that flicker of recognition in his eyes, but this time a small smile followed. She smiled back, and this time offered him a shy wave with the fingers of her right hand. Naruto's smile widened as he waved back before leaving to catch up with Jiraiya. Tsubaki and Obara were sitting together at the Chunin exam finals. Things had become a bit tense between the two of them in the past few months, over a couple of sensitive topics: their daughter's lack of proper preparation for the shinobi world, and Naruto Uzumaki. It was Naruto that was the focus of their thoughts right now, as they were both watching him fight Neji Hyuga, and he was once again the underdog. I still don't get why they let that punk graduate and be a genin. Obara said in her usual spiteful tone, this time with a darker, almost hateful edge. You know, I really don't get you anymore, Obara. Tsubaki exclaimed, her frustration finally reaching its limit. What do you have against him? He's never done anything to you. He's never done anything hurtful or bad to anyone in this village. The most he's done that might be considered trouble is pull off harmless pranks, and since he's been a ninja, he's done nothing but serve this village. He works harder at his missions than any other genin I've ever seen. So, answer me, what do you have against him? Obara looked at her friend in shock. Where had this come from? She always agreed with her before about that good-for-nothing punk. What do you mean, what do I have against him? You were there that night. You lost your husband, too. Obara responded in indignation, fortunately being drowned out by the noise of the crowd. And just how is that Naruto's fault, huh? Did he ask to be born that night? Did he ask to have his resident sealed inside of him? Has Naruto ever shown that he's anything like his resident at any time? Tsubaki asked indignantly, taking care to use certain catchwords to make her point while not breaking the law. Does Naruto behave like that in any way? Have you ever taken just a few moments to watch him? Or is it just easier for you to blame him for what your life is like right now instead of taking responsibility and moving on? Obara looked stricken at that. Not having an answer, Obara grew sullen and angry, bringing her attention back to the match. Tsubaki did the same, only to watch as Neji got into stance for his next attack, the gentle fist art, 8 trigrams, 64 palms. HMPH. Let's see that punk get himself out of this one, Obara said, in her usual spiteful tone as Neji opened up on Naruto, striking him with precision and closing off his tenketsu points, cutting him off from his chakra. Tsubaki gritted her teeth angrily at her friend's unwarranted spite. As Naruto went down, Obara seemed to smirk in satisfaction, only to grit her teeth as he got up again. Tsubaki, on the other hand, began to worry for the boy. She breathed a sigh of relief when Naruto got to his feet and showed that he intended to continue fighting. Both she and her companion began to get nervous, however, when Naruto seemed to start drawing on the Nine Tails chakra. What's going to happen now? Tsubaki thought worriedly. Obara simply sat there, glaring at Naruto in fearful anger. They both continued watching as Naruto maintained control of himself, continuing his fight with Neji, which ultimately ended with both of them knocking each other across the stadium with enough force to make craters in the stadium grounds. As Neji got out of his crater and stumbled over to Naruto, Obara chuckled darkly, while Tsubaki worried for Naruto while at the same time hoping that Naruto would get back up. After hearing Neji's diatribe about the reality of a failure, and then watching Naruto explode from the ground and connect with a strong uppercut, knocking Neji into the air and backwards about 30 feet, she grinned ecstatically. Somehow, she knew that Naruto would pull off a victory, and she was happy beyond words to be proven right. It was what happened next, however, that would burn itself into her memory forever, and begin to awaken feelings she never thought she would have toward the boy. Naruto responded to Neji's embittered acknowledgement of his defeat. For the record, I failed the graduation exam 3 times, cause there was this one jutsu that was always on the exam, and it tripped me up every time. It was the one jutsu that I just couldn't master. Tsubaki was listening intently, hanging on every word that came out of his mouth. She didn't know why, but for some reason, she had to know what he would say. Naruto continued, "My clones were pathetic. That's right, I flunked the shadow clone jutsu every time. So don't come whining to me with this destiny stuff, and stop trying to tell me you can't change what you are. You can do it, too, cause after all, unlike me, you're not a failure." The proctor called the match, declaring Naruto the winner. The crowd erupted in applause, giving Naruto the standing ovation he greatly deserved. Tsubaki, one of the very first to stand, began to cry, overwhelmed with admiration towards Naruto, and still feeling a bit ashamed of herself at how she once agreed with Obara about him. She clapped fervently, grinning widely, and lost in her own thoughts. "Naruto, how could I have been so blind? How could I have looked down my nose at someone who has such incredible strength of character? Who are you, Naruto Uzumaki? I don't know, but I mean to find out." With this, she resolved to seek him out after the Chunin exams were over. She still didn't know why, nor did she even know what she would say to him once she found him, but for some reason, she felt compelled to seek him out. She found herself evaluating the fight between Naruto and Neji, and what struck her the most were the differences between their characters, perspectives and viewpoints. Neji had been callous, cruel and arrogant, looking down his nose at Naruto, never bothering to even call him by his name, instead using names such as loser, failure, worthless, and impudent little brat. What made it worse was that Neji's arrogance had drawn the rest of the audience in, as well. Naruto had been completely written off as the loser of the fight by this crowd, simply because Neji's overconfidence had drawn the crowd to this conclusion. Naruto, on the other hand, didn't back down, but never did he respond even in kind to Neji. Even now, when Naruto had more than earned the right to gloat over his clearly defeated opponent, he wasn't doing so. There was no disrespect or condescension in his voice at all. He was a gracious winner, and even went so far as to try to spur Neji on to change and better himself. Tsubaki looked over at Obara once more, and her smile dropped at what she saw. Obara hadn't gotten up with everyone else. She hadn't even applauded Naruto's hard-earned victory, but rather just sat there with her arms folded on front of her and the same ever-present scowl on her face. This time, though, she could see a trace of shame in Obara's eyes as well. Obara was looking downward slightly, as though she knew she was wrong to have such hateful anger towards Naruto, but was still unwilling to let it go. Maybe it's time that I reevaluate my friendship with Obara, Tsubaki thought to herself, disappointed that Obara could hate someone, a child, no less, that much, especially knowing that she had no right to hate him at all. Again, this was accompanied by her own feelings of guilt, not having realized it sooner, or even paying attention to this aspect of her friend's nature that she now found quite unsettling. After sitting down, Obara growled out sullenly, "Why do you like him so much?" Tsubaki turned to Obara and responded plainly, "Because I actually dared to look him in the eye, and I saw a hurt, anguished, lonely and confused young boy. I saw the same things in his eyes that I often see in my own eyes every time I look in the mirror, except that they were magnified in his. I know how he feels because of the things that have been done to him, and I'm amazed at how well he stands up under them. Neither of us would have survived in his place, Obara, remember that." Obara glared at her friend for a moment longer before once more sullenly looking downward. Both of them sat there in silence throughout the rest of the matches until Sasuke Uchiha's Chidori struck Gaara of the desert through his sand shield, and a genjutsu was cast upon the stadium, causing both of them to fall asleep. Tsubaki and her daughter Kasumi were both dressed in black, the expected attire for mourning in public at a funeral. Both of them were shedding silent tears, so much damage, so many losses. So much had happened in the Leaf in the 3 days since the Chunin exams. The village had been invaded by both the Hidden Sand and the Hidden Sound. The invasion had been repelled, with Naruto himself taking out the most dangerous opponent in a fully transformed Gaara, by summoning none other than the chief Toad Gamabunta himself. The cost, however, was high, so many Leaf shinobi were killed in the battle, foremost among the casualties being 3rd Hokage Hiruzen Sarutobi. The only event that Tsubaki could even compare it to was the aftermath of the Nine Tails attack. There was that much destruction. The funeral service for all of those shinobi who had fallen during the invasion was in full swing, but Tsubaki was distracted by thoughts of a certain blonde boy that she'd caught sight of as he arrived with his teammates and went to the roof of Hokage Tower, where shinobi in the village and the Third's family and friends were mourning in a reserved area. Her heart nearly broke when she saw the state he was in, and she couldn't get that image out of her mind. This was the first time she'd ever seen him injured, as he had gauze taped to his forehead and both of his cheeks, as well as a few other bandages on his body, but it was his expression that struck her more than anything else. He looked sadder and more heartbroken than she could ever remember seeing him, even when she made eye contact with him at the academy. It was a look that she just wanted to take away from him. It was with these thoughts preoccupying her that she suddenly noticed that the service was over. She saw Naruto with his teammates and Sensei leaving the tower together. Tsubaki thought for a moment to approach Naruto as she had resolved to do during the Chunin exam finals, but decided not to as she saw him comforting and being comforted by some friends and comrades. It wouldn't be appropriate right now. Kasumi needs me more, and his friends need him more as well. I can approach him later, she thought as she attended to her and her daughter's grief. After the ceremony had ended, Kasumi had returned home on her own, while Naruto and his team had already left in order to get back to duty. As Team 7 walked away, she saw that Iruka hadn't yet left. I have seen Naruto and Iruka together a lot. They're pretty close from what I can gather. Maybe Iruka can tell me a little bit about him, she mused before walking up to Iruka to indulge her curiosity about Naruto. Excuse me, Iruka, she asked in order to garner the Chunin instructor's attention. He turned his head in her direction. Tsubaki. Tsubaki Kenpi, he asked before smiling. Wow, it's certainly been a while. How are you, all things considered? Tsubaki smiled in response. I'm doing okay. How are you? I'm alright, all in all. Tsubaki nodded. That's good to hear. Listen, I was wondering, how well do you know Naruto Uzumaki? Iruka frowned curiously. That's pretty random. Well, maybe, but I was just hoping I could learn a little more about him beyond what most people here in the village have to say. Iruka's frown went from curious to saddened. Yeah, it's true that generally people in the village aren't fair to him. But why not just ask him yourself? A couple of reasons. One is that either of us or both of us are too busy for me to be able to approach him and have a conversation of any length with him. But, the truth is that, even if I did have the chance to talk to him, Tsubaki paused, a dejected frown adorning her own features as she finished, I wouldn't even know what to say. Iruka's curiosity made itself known once more, both across his face and in his voice. Tsubaki, what prompted you to want to learn more about him? I'm guessing that there's more to this than the Chunin exams and the invasion. Tsubaki told him her story, beginning from when she and Ibara saw him on the swing by himself after he had failed the academy for the 3rd time, continuing through the other times she had encountered him and seen him, and ending with her decision to seek him out and try to talk to him. Iruka seemed grateful that at least one person had changed their opinion of Naruto without him having to do something to change it. There were those in the village who had never been unfair to Naruto, such as the Ichiraku family, Hiruzen Sarutobi, Kakashi, and most recently, Jiraiya. Sadly, though, they were very few, and very far between. Even Iruka had been unfair to him at first, not wanting anything to do with him because, like so many, he was reminded of what happened with his parents on that horrible night some 13 years ago. He couldn't help but think on how he and Naruto had bonded once he had first seen just how truly lonely and anguished the boy was that night in the cemetery. The words that Naruto had yelled at him sometimes still echoed in his mind. I'm not a nuisance, and I'm not some kind of germ. I have a name. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. Tsubaki was the first person he had talked to who had changed her opinion of Naruto simply because she saw a lonely human being, not because he did something spectacular, confrontational, or anything like that. You know, it's funny, Iruka began in response to her. As close as Naruto and I are now, it took Naruto getting in my face and yelling at me before I saw him as more than a simple reminder of the Nine Tails. Did you know that I was assigned as a teacher originally by the third because he wanted someone in Naruto's life that could help him? Tsubaki frowned in curious surprise, shaking her head. No, I didn't know that. Iruka smiled nostalgically, relaying the tale of how he and Naruto grew close, how at first, he ignored him and acted like he didn't matter, how Kakashi told him that the reason he needed to somehow reach Naruto was because he was the only one who could. The night at the graveyard where Naruto had told him that he was no longer going to attend classes, and how Naruto had gone out on a dare from one of his peers into a combat zone and had almost gotten killed. The only reason he accepted that dare was because he was so lonely, and they told him they'd be his friends if he did it. It's amazing how you saw it and he didn't even need to say anything to you, he finished as he turned his gaze back towards her, intent on telling Tsubaki what she wanted to know. He's lonely, still. I only wish I had more time to give to him, now. I love him like a little brother. He smiled at the thought before continuing, Naruto's a truly unique and amazing person. He never gives up, either on himself, or on anyone else. Once he sets his mind to something, he'll stop at nothing to achieve it, and his goals are so lofty and noble. Of course, you know that he's determined to one day be Hokage, right? Tsubaki nodded. Well, let me tell you, Iruka continued, the more I see him, and the more I watch him grow, I can't help but think that one day he's going to do it. Tsubaki's eyebrows shot up in surprise upon hearing this. Iruka pressed on, the truth is that so many people write him off at best, or outright hate him at worst, but he has this strange power, for lack of a better word, but it seems to fit because he's the only person I've ever known who's like this. You can't get to truly know Naruto and not eventually come to like or love him. He can become friends with anyone, it doesn't matter who they are, or where they're from. He's also fiercely protective and loyal towards his friends and loved ones. Iruka turned his gaze in the direction that Naruto had walked off in as he finished. Tsubaki, if you want to know what to say to him, just say whatever comes to mind. If you can't think of anything to say, knowing Naruto the way I do and judging from what you've told me, he'll somehow find a way to start a conversation. Tsubaki pondered his words for a while before nodding. Iruka, thank you for your advice. I think I'll do that. Before long, both of them said their farewells to each other, Iruka leaving to prepare for class the following day, Tsubaki on her way home to begin preparing dinner for herself and her daughter. Thoughts of just what she might say to Naruto once she encountered him racing through her mind. She was back. Lady Tsunade, one of the legendary Sannin, the queen of elixirs and slugs, the world's greatest medic, was back in the Hidden Leaf, and she was going to be the fifth Hokage. Tsubaki had tried to find Naruto after her conversation with Iruka, but by the time she'd finally tracked him down, Master Jiraiya had already taken him out of the village on some kind of training trip or something. Now, though, the stories were flying about how Naruto was with Jiraiya and Tsunade when they faced down Orochimaru, and about how it was ultimately Naruto who convinced Tsunade to come back to the village to be Hokage. Tsubaki's hero was back, and it was Naruto who brought her home. It was reported that they were a short distance away from the village gates, and they would be walking through the streets any minute now on their way to the Hokage Tower. Tsubaki was waiting in eager anticipation, not only to see her hero again, but to see Naruto as well, who was becoming a bit of a hero to her as well. Shortly afterwards, the sounds of cheering could be heard from the direction of the village gates. They had arrived. The cheering grew louder as those closer to Tsubaki caught sight of Tsunade and party. It wasn't much longer before Tsubaki saw them, and there was Naruto running up to walk right alongside them, all sporting a mile-wide grin. Tsubaki noticed that this grin wasn't like the phony, goofy grin she'd see on his face when she usually watched him. He was genuinely happy at that moment. She smiled at this, as from what she could tell from her observations of the boy, as well as what she learned about him from her conversation with Iruka, genuine happiness was something Naruto rarely experienced. Tsubaki began to cheer with everyone around her as the party drew near. She made her way to the front of the crowd so that she could get a better look at Naruto. She saw that the young blonde must have noticed her movement out of the corner of his eye, as he turned towards her the moment she emerged toward the front. Smiling even wider, and nodding and waving at him again, he closed his eyes and waved back once more before turning his attention back towards the trio that he was following. Tsubaki noticed that a few of those around her started looking her way, mostly in confusion, probably wondering how she and Naruto seemed to know each other. She just shrugged it off and continued cheering with everyone else. Tsubaki was frantic with worry. Naruto had just been brought back to the village by Kakashi, and from what people knew, he was very badly injured. Apparently, Sasuke Uchiha had either defected from the village to join Orochimaru, or he'd been kidnapped and forcibly taken to him, and Naruto was one of those who were sent to bring him back home. When she had heard tale of his injuries, and that he had just been brought in and admitted to the ICU of Hidden Leaf Hospital, she started running all over town, talking to anyone she knew and trying to find out as much as she could. What happened? How did he get hurt so badly? Just how badly is he hurt? She kept asking herself over and over again. Even her daughter had taken notice of how out of character she seemed to be acting, and as Kasumi wasn't the most perceptive girl on the planet, this spoke volumes concerning Tsubaki's current state, more to herself than to anyone else. She didn't care. The only thing she cared about was finding out about how Naruto was doing, and seeing if she could help him in any way. After finding out very little on the streets, she decided to go to the hospital to see what she could learn. When she spoke to the reception desk in the main lobby, the attendant seemed quite saddened and worried herself. She informed Tsubaki that more information could be gleaned from the reception area in the intensive care ward before telling her how to get there. Thanking the woman for her information and directions, she immediately proceeded to the ICU to gather what other information she could. When she arrived, she found the ward to be a whirlwind of activity. With how quickly all of the staff and orderlies were running to and fro, she could only draw one conclusion: Naruto apparently wasn't the only new arrival. Tsubaki sat in the lobby and waited for things to settle down. 2 hours of waiting later, several exhausted orderlies and one exhausted nurse who was acting as the ward's receptionist returned to the main waiting station. Tsubaki went to the front desk to inquire about Naruto's condition. The receptionist, a lime green-haired woman around Tsubaki's age whose name tag read, Isako, seemed surprised. "You're the first one to ask about him. Do you have any kind of relationship to him?" "Well, no," Tsubaki responded in a subdued manner. "I'm just a concerned party is all. My daughter and him were in the same class at the academy." "Can you tell me how he is?" The newly identified Isako broke down his injuries for the woman: 2 separate piercings through his right lung by either a large, wide weapon or a jutsu of some sort, chakra depletion, a fractured skull, several broken and displaced ribs, 6 fractured cervical vertebrae, severe blood loss and a cleanly fractured left tibia. Tsubaki gasped at the severity of his injuries and began to cry, but Isako reassured her. "Don't worry," Isako said calmly to show her reassurance. "His tenant apparently heals his body at an accelerated rate. Most of his injuries are already healing. From what we hear from Lady Tsunade, he'll be out for a few days, but he should be up and around after about a week or so." Tsubaki nodded gratefully, sniffling in an effort to slow her tears. "Thank you." "When are visiting hours?" "Well, people won't be able to enter his room for at least 2 days, but after that, normal visiting hours apply. 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., Isako smiled. Anything else I can do for you? No, thank you so much. You've put me at ease. I'm just glad to hear that he'll be okay. I'll be by in a couple of days to bring him some flowers. Isako smiled once more. You're welcome. And don't you worry. If there's one thing we all know in this ward, it's that Naruto Uzumaki's a fighter. He'll pull through this, and he'll walk out of here right as rain. Tsubaki smiled in response, finally reassured that he would be okay. Thanks, again, that's good to know, and it's good to know that he's well cared for, here. With that, they parted company, with Tsubaki on her way out to take care of her usual day-to-day business. 3 days later, a cool, partly cloudy morning found Tsubaki leaving a clothing store, having just bought a tracksuit similar to the one that Naruto enjoyed wearing. When she saw it, she thought that it would be something that Naruto would like, especially with how what he'd been wearing when he was brought back in was probably in tatters and ribbons. The pants were the same orange color as what he normally wore, but the jacket was slightly different. Instead of being mostly orange with dark blue across his shoulders, this jacket was orange on most of the torso, but black up top. The black in the new jacket didn't just cross his shoulders and upper chest, though, the sleeves were also black, and the zipper line of the jacket was also solid black, about 2 inches out from each side of the zipper. It was also a bit big for him, but she figured he would grow into it once he hit his growth spurt. The tracksuit was in a clothing box and wrapped as a present. A few moments later found her at her next destination, the Yamanaka flower shop. Entering the store, she heard the bell chime as the door moved, alerting the attendant on duty that a customer was entering. A moment later, one Ino Yamanaka came jogging into the sales floor. Hello, welcome to the Yamanaka flow. Oh hey, you're Kasumi's mother, aren't you? She piped out inquisitively with a smile. Yes, Ino, that's right, Tsubaki responded, returning the girl's smile. I'm here to get a small bouquet for a hospital patient. Okay, well, give me a minute to put something together for you, Ino responded cheerfully. Tsubaki waited patiently, watching Ino work. If it was one thing the girl knew well, it was how to put together a beautiful floral arrangement. Kasumi had complained to her mother about Ino's talent in that regard when they took the kunoichi-only classes together in the academy. The bouquet was a beautiful circle of white lilies surrounding a single sunflower in the center, all placed into a vase. Tsubaki requested a particular bright orange one that caught her eye. So, who's the patient you're going to see? Ino asked curiously. Oh, no one you need worry over, Tsubaki responded tactfully, and thanks for preparing this for me. You're welcome, Ino responded with a smile, hiding her disappointment well. Tsubaki quickly paid for her bouquet and left, wishing Ino a good day on the way out. Ino responded in kind before resuming the tasks of keeping the store presentable and the merchandise fresh. Half an hour later, Tsubaki entered the hospital and made her way directly to the intensive care ward, gift and flowers in hand. When she arrived, she saw that Isako was on duty now as well. She saw Tsubaki and recognized her immediately. With a smile, she stood up and bade Tsubaki follow her, leading her directly to Naruto's room. As they approached the room, Isako stopped and turned to Tsubaki. Brace yourself, she warned, Naruto's pretty banged up right now. But I promise you, he will be fine. Okay. In fact, she extended her hands in Tsubaki's direction. Why don't you let me hold those for now? Tsubaki nodded nervously, afraid of what she might see once the door was opened and she was admitted in. Handing the vase and present to Isako, she opened the door herself and entered the room. Upon sighting the patient that she was there for, she gasped and cried out in surprise and horror, bringing her hands up to her mouth. There on the bed, in a hospital gown, was Naruto. The crown of his head was wrapped in bandages, patches of blood having leaked through here and there. His face was severely bruised and swollen in places, freckled with scratches and gashes. In his mouth was a plastic tube that could be followed to a respirator, assisting him in his breathing. His left thigh was in a cast and elevated by a harness. The parts of his upper body that were not covered by the gown were wrapped in bandages, again with blood seeping through in various places. On the right side of his chest, blood had seeped through the gauze she could tell was underneath the gown, and even into the gown itself. IV tubes were secreting various chemicals into his body in various places, and diodes were taped onto him, allowing various vital readings, such as blood pressure, pulse, oxygen levels and brain activity to be displayed. A brace was on his neck, holding his head firmly in place. Tsubaki couldn't stop the tears that began to flow. Isako placed the vase and the wrapped box down on a counter before turning to address her. I know it looks bad. Looks bad? Tsubaki turned to her, eyes wide in dumbfounded astonishment. Her voice rose several octaves as she repeated, looks bad. He looks like he shouldn't even be alive. How can you be so calm about this? I've seen him in worse shape, Isako admitted quietly, putting a hand on Tsubaki's shoulder. I don't like seeing him like this any more than you do, but, believe me when I say, he'll be okay. He won't even scar over from this. Just watch. This time next week, he'll be discharged with a clean bill of health and walk out of here without any sign of injury. She developed an amused smirk as she added, though he'll actually sneak out of here before then and head straight to Ichiraku's. He really doesn't handle forced bed rest well, she finished with a chuckle. Tsubaki visibly calmed down at this. So, you're really not worried? Isako smiled and shook her head. No, we're not. We know for a fact that he'll be fine. And we're going to make his recovery as quick and as comfortable as possible in the meantime. Tsubaki turned her gaze back to Naruto to regard him once more. You said you've seen him in worse shape than this, how is that possible? Well, Isako began sadly, there was one incident when he was just a small boy where he was beaten, severely. It happened on his 6th birthday, and, well, some people decided that ignoring him simply wasn't enough that year. A few drunks decided that they would be crusaders that year, and end the blight left by the Nine Tails attack. They beat Naruto to near death, and, her voice began to break as she started to recall what was done to the small, malnourished blonde child that had been brought in for emergency treatment. Her reaction was not lost on Tsubaki as she turned to her and continued, please don't ask me to tell you what they did to him. They did unspeakable things. They did things that were so bad that the memories of them weren't just sealed within Naruto's mind, they were removed entirely by Inoichi Yamanaka himself. The third punished those responsible so severely that he only told us that the information was classified. The medical records and charts from that attack were also classified and, I think they were destroyed. Tsubaki found herself in tears once more. She didn't want to imagine what those monsters could have done to this boy. She'd never ask him, as from what Isako had just said, he had no memory of it at all, even deeply buried, and she'd never pursue the matter anyway, she was afraid of what she'd find. She then turned back to Naruto and studied him once more. Don't worry, Isako spoke up once again, he'll never remember that incident, and there are no visible scars anywhere on him from it. Like I said, though, we've seen him in worse shape, and he's pulled through before. He'll pull through good as new. Tsubaki looked at the woman again. Seeing the confidence in her eyes brought Tsubaki great comfort this time. She smiled at Isako in gratitude before turning back to Naruto. As Isako left the room, Tsubaki slowly walked toward him. She stopped at his bedside and brought her hands up to his sleeping face, gently caressing it in an affectionate manner. She leaned down slowly and carefully towards his ear and spoke, I don't know if you can hear me or not, but I'm glad you're going to be alright. I know you don't hear this anywhere near as much as you deserve to, but, thank you. Thank you so much, for everything that you do for us, here in the village. As she finished, she planted a slow, lingering kiss on his cheek, just off of his mouth. After several seconds, she pulled away, tears of gratitude, both to him, and to whatever Kami was watching over him, pouring down her face. She smiled, a warm, loving, affectionate smile, as she pulled away, her fingers stroking his cheeks as she pulled off. She left the room, the receptionist smiling just as warmly as Tsubaki herself was. Maybe it's time I returned to active duty and pursued that dream I had of being a medical ninja again, Tsubaki mused to herself, thinking on the idea of making herself useful once again. Had they stayed in Naruto's room a moment longer, they would have noticed a single tear roll down the side of his face, and that his lips had turned upward into a very weak, barely noticeable smile. Ino Yamanaka had just been relieved of her shift at the shop by her mother. Her next destination was the hospital to visit Choji and Naruto, both of whom she had heard were in the intensive care ward, though Shikamaru informed her Choji had been moved into a regular ward as he was out of immediate danger. Naruto, 5 days after being admitted into ICU, had not regained consciousness yet. On her way out, she picked up a flower for each of them. When she arrived at the hospital, she decided to go to Naruto's room first, as she knew it wouldn't be a long visit. Receiving directions from the front desk, and later from Isako in ICU, she made her way to Naruto's room. As she entered and laid eyes on Naruto, she gasped. Even though she had steeled herself in anticipation of serious injury, she simply couldn't believe what was done to him. She didn't know the details of his mission or of the opponent he fought that gave him these injuries. As a genin, she wasn't privy to such information, but she couldn't imagine how, or even why, a person would beat an opponent so badly instead of just killing them quickly. Shaking off her shock, she placed her flower in the empty white standard vase that was a hidden leaf hospital room mainstay. She placed her hand on Naruto's near shoulder and said quietly, "Get better soon, okay? This village isn't as happy a place without you running around." As she turned to leave, she caught sight of the same orange vase and flower bouquet that she had sold to Kasumi's mother a couple of days earlier, as well as the gift-wrapped box that she had seen the woman carrying. Frowning in thought, she asked herself, how does Kasumi's mom know Naruto? I didn't know she cared this much about him. After thinking about it for a few moments, she decided to let it go. She had seen the way that a lot of people in the village had looked at Naruto, and she'd also heard the whispers. She decided that it wasn't important why someone like Kasumi's mother, who she thought had disliked the blonde, now cared about him. What was important was that she cared now. Nodding to herself, and satisfied with her conclusion, she left Naruto's room to go visit Choji and keep him company for a while. Naruto finally woke up. He had no idea how long he'd been out for. The only thing he knew was that he hurt a lot. As his eyes adjusted themselves to the light in the room, flashes of what had happened prior to waking up here started coming back to him. Sasuke, his curse seal, horrid, monstrous hand-like wings on his back, his skin having that sickly gray pallor, a Chidori being shoved through his chest, being pile-drived from several hundred feet up. From there, it got a little hazy, as he could only remember seeing red. Not wanting to dwell on these images any longer, he tried to look around and get his bearings, only to discover that he couldn't turn his head. After a while, he figured out that he could at least roll his body just a little, allowing him to use his eyes to cover the remaining angles so that he could see the room he was in. He took in the various trappings and fixtures of the room, and it dawned on him that he was in the hospital. At that moment, the smells of sterilization and medicines seemed to make themselves known, as did the blips and bleeps of various medical monitors and devices. He could hear the bleeps beginning to vary in rhythm and tone, indicating changes in readings and activity. Before long, the door opened, and Isako entered the room with a smile. "Hi, Naruto. It's good to see that you're back with us." "Yeah, hi Isako," he responded, depressed. "Oh, come on, why the long face?" she asked cheerfully. "You're okay, all of your friends made it back safely, some a little worse for wear than others, but alive and safe now, doesn't that make you happy?" "But we failed our mission," he answered in the same numb tone, "and now Sasuke's gone to Orochimaru." Isako walked up to him and laid a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry about that, Naruto. But at least you have a chance now to go back out after him. I'm just glad you're alright, because you were really banged up when Kakashi brought you in." And you've never been out this long, either. Naruto frowned at this. How long was I out for? You were brought here 6 days ago. The combination of both your injuries and chakra exhaustion is why you've been out for so long. And I've been out the whole time. Isuko nodded. Naruto, you had several injuries that would have been fatal for anyone that isn't you. Naruto closed his eyes and sighed. Well, I guess this fox in my gut's good for something, huh? Isuko responded. Yeah, I guess it is. So out of curiosity, when did you find out about that? Mizuki-sensei told me the night Iruka-sensei made me a genin. Isuko nodded with a smile. Well, we're just glad you're alright, sweetie. Let me run a few quick scans. Here, she began to trail off while performing the mystical palm jutsu, her hands glowing green after performing the hand signs, as she continued, so that we can maybe get you out of some of these bandages and restraints and clean you up a little, huh? Naruto didn't say anything. He simply closed his eyes sadly while Isuko worked. When she was done, she informed him of her findings. Well, the neck brace can come off, and so can the cast on your leg and some of these bandages. The rest of the bandages need to be changed out for clean ones, so I'll take care of that, too. Isuko took her time removing what was no longer necessary so as not to aggravate any of his still healing injuries. After removing the brace, cast and the unnecessary bandaging, she took the time to change out the rest of his bandaging and gauze. Once she was done, Isuko spoke up once more. Lady Tsunade will be around shortly to check on you, herself. She's been worried about you. Naruto couldn't help but smile at this, even if his smile was small. It was nice to know that people worried about him. You've also had a few visitors. Really? Who? Well, there was Ino Yamanaka, Shikamaru Nara, and Tsubaki Kenpi. Tsubaki Kenpi? Naruto asked, genuinely confused. Yeah, does that surprise you? Well, it's just that I don't know a Tsubaki Kenpi. She hummed in thoughtful surprise at his response. Well, she's the one who brought you the gift and the flowers in the orange vase that are on your nightstand, there. She did say that she was just a concerned party. Isuko's eyes lit up in realization as she remembered one particular detail. She mentioned that you were in her daughter's graduating class. Naruto frowned in thought before picturing one honey brown-haired woman's face. Could it be Kasumi's mom? Isuko brought him out of his musings as she offered, well, let's help you get to the bathroom, huh? She assisted him out of his bed and supported him into the bathroom so he could empty himself. Once he was done, she helped him back into bed and updated the chart that was on the clipboard hanging at the foot of bed. Well, I'll leave you be for now. The Hokage will be here shortly, okay? Naruto nodded with a weak smile as Isuko left the room. Left to himself, he looked at the vase and the gift-wrapped box on his nightstand. There was also a get well card sitting on them. Picking up the card, he opened it and read the handwritten message inside. Naruto, I know you don't know me, but I'm glad to hear that you're going to be alright. I hope you like the gift I brought for you. It's a little big for you right now, but I know you'll grow into it in no time at all. I hope you get better quickly, and I also want to thank you for everything you do for this village, much of which we don't deserve from you. You're in my thoughts and prayers. Please, take care. Tsubaki Kenpi. Naruto was touched by the card's contents. His eyes welled up in joyful gratitude at the gesture. He put the card down and picked up the gift box. Tearing off the paper, he opened it to see a track suit similar to the one he normally wore, but with more black in the jacket. He thought it was the coolest thing ever, but boy, that Tsubaki lady wasn't kidding when she said it was a little big. Regardless, she got him a present, and grow into it, he would. He placed the track suit back into the box and closed it up. A smile adorned his face as he waited for Tsunade to show up. True to Isuko's prediction, Naruto had sneaked out of the hospital for a trip to Ichiraku Ramen. 4 days after her visit to his room, Tsubaki saw Naruto, still in bandages all over his body, literally being dragged out of his culinary haven by those same bandages by none other than Lady Tsunade's apprentice Shizune. In addition to the bandages, However, he had also been wrapped in a straitjacket. Naruto was protesting loudly that he was fine, and that he felt fine, while Shizune was firmly telling him that he wasn't, regardless of what he said. Shizune also added, somewhat teasingly, that she would allow Naruto to get some ramen, once he was all healed, to which Naruto protested even more loudly, saying that he was fully healed already. Tsubaki couldn't help but laugh heartily at the comical scene being played out before her. At the same time, she was relieved that he was conscious, and he didn't seem to have any overt signs of the injuries he had suffered just 1 week ago. It made her happy to see that he was in good spirits, and that he wasn't letting the things that happened to him get him down. Having caught the infectious smile that Naruto always gave her once more, she continued about her business with a noticeable spring in her step. Tsubaki, for the past several months, had thrown herself into training to get her conditioning back to where it once was. Part of this was just to be of service to the village, but it was also to inspire both Kasumi and Amy to put forth greater effort by showing them what a real kunoichi trained like. Kasumi and Amy did start to notice, but the way they saw Tsubaki working herself into the ground in order to get into top form once again actually had the opposite effect on the girls. Instead of being inspired, it terrified them both. Whenever Tsubaki offered to allow them to train with her, they both steadfastly refused, disappointing Tsubaki greatly. More and more often found the girls with Ibara more than Tsubaki these days. Kasumi would come home to eat and sleep, and also to get help with her homework, but for the most part, mother and daughter didn't talk much anymore. It wasn't too much longer before the girls did graduate, this time passing the second Genin exam and officially becoming Genin. This actually prompted Kasumi and Amy to move out of their mother's houses and get an apartment together. Kasumi, for some reason, didn't really bother coming around anymore. Tsubaki could only guess it was because Kasumi needed to keep her own little idealistic view of what it meant to be a kunoichi up for as long as possible. On the one hand, Tsubaki couldn't exactly blame her. Children wanted to keep their cheerful, naive, innocent view of the world for as long as they could. Tsubaki herself certainly wished she could have kept it for longer than she had, what with graduating during a time of war and having to grow up very quickly on the front lines. But she had thrived as a kunoichi, it was what she was born to do, and she'd been on her way to being accepted as a medical ninja in training when the Nine Tails attacked Naruto. Her thoughts now frequently wandered towards the boy that had won more and more of her admiration since he'd graduated from the academy. If the rumors were to be believed, then he would be leaving to train under Master Jiraiya as his official apprentice for the next 3 years or so. Smiling at the thought, already knowing just how strong he was after hearing more and more of the boy's exploits, she could only imagine how strong he would be in 3 years with Master Jiraiya training him. I imagine he'll also grow into that new track suit I bought for him, too. She thought, in some glee, with just a hint of desire. Okay, Tsubaki, let's not get ahead of ourselves, here, she told herself, reining her thoughts in, though the smile on her face at the thoughts she'd been having stayed there. Jiraiya and Naruto were on their way out of the village. He wouldn't be seen in the village for 3 whole years. The village wouldn't be the same without him, and everyone knew it. His absence would be noticed, and he would be missed, but at the same time, the knowledge of what he would be doing in his absence inspired all of his peers, and many others within the village to work hard and train themselves. Naruto's peers, especially those from his graduating class as well as Might Guy's students, had all started training harder than ever before, not only because they wanted to be able to protect their friend, but because they also wanted to be able to stand and fight alongside him when he returned. Tsubaki could only smile at that thought. Naruto had a presence of inspired leadership that he likely didn't realize he possessed. He inspired people to follow his example simply as a byproduct of who he was, yet another unique power of his that made him truly special. She was one of the people that watched Naruto walk off with Jiraiya as they left through the gates. Catching his gaze one last time before he left through the gates, she smiled and waved at him. Deciding that it was time she said something to him, She called out, "Good luck, Naruto. Stay safe out there, and get stronger." "Thanks," he yelled back with a smile and a wave of his own, "I will. Believe it." As the pair walked off, Tsubaki thought to herself, "I can't wait to see just what you'll be like when you get back, Naruto," and with that, she went on her way, missing the blonde whirlwind of hyperactivity already. As he and Jiraiya traveled down the road, Naruto couldn't shake the gnawing familiarity in the back of his head. The woman who wished him well. He recognized her as the mother of his old classmate Kasumi, and he had also remembered seeing her around the village, smiling and waving at him. She was one of the more genuine people in the village about her friendliness towards him, that much he could tell, but there was something else. Why can't I figure out what this feeling is? What is it about her voice that comforts me? He asked himself in frustration. "What's eaten you, kiddo?" asked Jiraiya, clearly seeing that Naruto was preoccupied with something. Naruto looked at his master and answered, "Honestly, it's something I don't think I'm gonna be able to figure out. That lady who wished me luck on the way out of the village." Jiraiya nodded, indicating that he knew who he was talking about. "Well, something about her voice is just, I don't know, comforting to me. And I really don't know why." Jiraiya smiled knowingly at him. "Well, it'll probably come to you in time if it's important, Naruto." But otherwise, his knowing smile turned into a perverted grin. "If nothing else, you got yourself a pretty lady who seems to want to see you again." Jiraiya finished with a loud, boisterous laugh. Naruto just grumbled at his teacher's antics. Yeah, whatever you say, pervy sage." Both of them continued their travels, though Naruto couldn't help but keep his master's words in the back of his mind. Tsubaki had a horrible, sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. Something terrible had happened. The only time that the Hokage summoned a shinobi or kunoichi's next of kin to their office was when the ninja in question had been hurt, raped or killed. When she had arrived at the Hokage's office, she knocked on the door. "Enter." She heard Tsunade's voice from the other side. She opened the door and entered. To her surprise, Abara was there as well, and she looked upset. "Tsubaki Kenpi?" asked Tsunade, wanting to confirm her identity. "That's right, Lady Hokage," Tsubaki responded. Tsunade closed her eyes and sighed, "You'll want to sit down for this. Trust me." Tsubaki immediately felt a lump rise in her throat as she took the seat Tsunade indicated for her. Tsunade proceeded to explain what had transpired, and that Tsubaki and Abara's daughters had been killed in action. Apparently there was no next of kin for either their third genin teammate or the Junin sensei, this explaining why only Tsubaki and Abara were there. Tsubaki was in shock, with Abara doing little better. Kasumi and Ami's first C-ranked mission had been mislabeled. Kasumi and Ami's genin team had been commissioned to take down a simple group of bandits that had been terrorizing a town. They were told that it was a particularly lusty group of men, therefore an all-female team had been requested. The mission was simple: infiltrate, seduce to distract, and eliminate. It seemed an easy enough task, except for the fact that the village hiring the team left out one important detail: a Junin rogue ninja from the Hidden Mist was leading the group. The Junin sensei of Kasumi's team was a rookie Junin, while the rogue ninja was a veteran Junin. The difference in their skills could not have been more pronounced. The bodies of all four kunoichi had been recovered after Tsunade sent Team Kurenai, with Kakashi Hatake as backup, out for search and retrieval. The rogue ninja even gave Kakashi a hard time, but was eventually dispatched. When the bodies were found, they had long since been killed, and defiled in numerous ways, except for the Junin, who'd been kept alive by the rogue ninja as a plaything, but not before having her legs amputated at the knee, and her arms amputated at the elbow. Once Kakashi and Team Kurenai arrived, the rogue Junin had gutted the Junin sensei, just so she could die slowly and give a report of what had been done to her and her team first in case he didn't make it out alive, himself. She told them every gruesome detail of what had happened, what the men had done to them, how they had used and abused them for their own wanton desires, how Natsuri, Kasumi and Ami's teammate, had been the only one of her students to put up any kind of struggle, and how only Natsuri had worked to find a way out of the situation they were in before she was done in by these ruthless men. She told them all of this before expiring slowly and painfully from blood loss. Tsubaki and Obara knew what this meant. Of the three genin, only Natsuri dealt with the situation as a true kunoichi. The bodies of their comrades had just been returned to the village, and were being prepared for burial. While they were being transported back to the village by Kurenai and her team, Kakashi went to the hiring village to find the mission contractor so that he could figure out what happened. He found out that they honestly didn't know about the rogue Junin that led the group, they'd never seen him. This tragedy was the simple result of honest mistakes and insufficient intel. Ladies, please, if there's anything you need, or if there's anything I can do for either of you, please don't hesitate to call on me, okay? Tsunade offered, hoping to provide what comfort she could for the grieving mothers. Obara simply sat there, silent tears flowing down her cheeks, her teeth gritted together in anguish. Tsubaki shed silent tears as well, hanging her head. Tsubaki began to mutter while slowly shaking her head back and forth, I told them, I told them. Obara looked at her former friend and snapped, what are you talking about? Not even bothering to look up, Tsubaki answered the question in a slow, numb monotone, I told them that they needed to train more. I told them that their training was all they would have to fall back on in the field. Her voice broke as she continued, I told them that something like this could happen, but they didn't listen to me. Her cries became quietly vocal as she finished. Obara only looked on in anger at Tsubaki's words. I told them, Tsubaki continued, that their prince wasn't going to come in and save the day, and that they needed to train and stop treating this like some kind of game. Or maybe they should have depended on him to come and rescue them instead. Obara snapped angrily, finally losing her cool as her own voice broke, except he's out on a training trip so he couldn't be here to protect our daughters, now, could he? Tsubaki, on impulse, stood up, and drummed the other woman hard across the face, knocking her out of her seat. Don't you dare blame Naruto for something that he had no fault in. The only ones to blame for this are the men who killed them. But as hard as this is for you to accept, and as cruel as it might sound, the fact of the matter is that Kasumi and Amy should never have been kunoichi to begin with. They were Uchiha fangirls in the academy, and they never grew out of that. This would have happened eventually anyway, so stop looking for someone to blame. And don't you ever use Naruto Uzumaki as a scapegoat in my presence again. Do you understand me? Holding her hand to her reddened cheek, Obara looked at her former friend in shock, before her shock turned to anger. She was about to retort and retaliate before Tsunade interjected, Obara. Obara turned to the Hokage, who continued, I agree with Tsubaki, quite frankly. And while I do sympathize with the fact that your life's just been turned upside down, I will not sit idly by and allow you to slander one of my best shinobi. Take it from someone who knows. If you don't change your perspective, and if you don't find the strength to take proper responsibility for yourself, you'll end up bitter, old and alone, with nothing but regrets. Now, if there's nothing that you need at the moment, please leave. If you need anything else, my door is open to you, starting tomorrow. Tsunade looked at Obara very pointedly, letting her know in no uncertain terms that any further outbursts on her part would not be tolerated. Obara collected herself, narrowed her eyes into a glare, and left without another word. Once she was gone, Tsunade looked at Tsubaki, genuinely impressed with how she stood up for Naruto. She hadn't known a lot of people who would do such a thing in the village since she had taken the reins as Hokage. Following this, she let out a frustrated sigh. Barely a month has gone by since he left, and already people are forgetting all Naruto's done for them. Tsubaki simply turned her gaze back to Tsunade and explained, that's not it, Lady Tsunade. Obara's always hated Naruto, just because seeing him reminds her of the fact that she lost her husband in the Nine Tails attack. Well, that explains her animosity, Tsunade remarked. Tsubaki shook her head in disagreement, no, it's just her excuse. The truth is that she's just not a kind or compassionate person, she never was. She's one of those people who need somebody to blame, and Naruto's burden gives her an easy target. I lost my husband that night just like she did. Both of us were left widowed with infant daughters at 13 years old. We were both Chunin, and we had to resign from active duty so we could be home with our children, so in a sense, we lost our careers that night, too, but none of that is Naruto's fault. I'm ashamed to say that I once shared her point of view, until I actually saw who he was behind the goofy facade he puts up. Tsunade's eyes narrowed curiously. Really? What did you see? Tsubaki recollected the tale of how she saw Naruto on the tire swing as the only student in the academy who didn't graduate with his class, and how at first, she only saw him as the boy who had the fox in him. She shared about how she looked him in the eye, only to see feelings and emotions that she knew quite well. She then shared about how her view changed the more she saw him around and observed him. Tsunade smiled at Tsubaki's accounts of Naruto. Even Tsunade herself had to let Naruto grow on her, and it took Naruto standing up to protect her on both a broken leg and a torn quadricep. This woman simply saw something real in Naruto's eyes before she started changing her opinion of him for the better. Lady Tsunade, Tsubaki asked suddenly, I would like to request a skills evaluation so I can return to active duty. Tsunade frowned in surprise. Tsubaki, are you sure that's such a good idea, right now? I mean, you're going to need some time to grieve. I believe it would be helpful to me, Lady Hokage. My only child is gone, and while I will take the time to grieve, Tsubaki's voice began to break as the tears started to flow. I want to be of use. I need to keep going, and moving forward. I always wanted to be a medical ninja. Really? Tsunade asked as she leaned forward to listen closely, now quite interested in the woman's request. Yes, ma'am, replied Tsubaki enthusiastically, you were always my hero in the academy. I had to write a report about a great Konoha ninja as one of my assignments, and I chose you. I always thought that your proposal to put a medical ninja on every ninja squad was a brilliant idea, and I always wished that it would have been implemented. Tsunade, now even more impressed, responded, wow. It's not often I meet someone your age who actually knows of that proposal. Do you still wish to learn medical ninjutsu? Very much, milady, Tsubaki responded. All right then, Tsunade said with a smile, in exactly 2 weeks' time, I'll evaluate your skills myself and determine what rank you'll be given. You can report here at 8 a.m., and I'll take you to a training ground. I'll also make arrangements for you to begin training in medical ninjutsu. In the meantime, please, grieve for your lost child, and if you need anything, please feel free to come to me, even if it's just to go out and have a drink. Tsubaki smiled gratefully and bowed to the older blonde. Thank you, Lady Tsunade. There's a good chance that I'll do just that. Tsunade smiled and nodded. Both of them said their goodbyes and Tsubaki left the office to go home and grieve the loss of Kasumi and Amy. Tsubaki and Tsunade had gone out for drinks together several times. Tsubaki would talk, and sometimes cry, while Tsunade would offer what comfort she could. A small funeral service was held for the team that had recently been lost. Tsubaki and Obara didn't have anything to say to each other, as both were too upset. Several of Kasumi and Ami's classmates and former classmates attended the funeral, including most of the Rookie 9. Many condolences were offered, and both parents walked away from the service feeling comforted and cared for. After the funeral, Tsubaki threw herself into preparing for her evaluation. When the time came around, Tsunade evaluated her overall skills, and allowed her to return to active duty at her previous rank of Chunin. Instead of the typical housewife's garb she was known to wear, she could now usually be seen in standard Chunin attire. Green flak vest, black shirt and pants, though she chose to go with skin-tight, form-fitting variations of the outfit, black ninja sandals, and a black headband that she wore around her waist as a belt. Her conditioning was now plain for all to see, muscles in all the right places, just enough to make her own curves a little more prominent. While she was always slender, she now looked quite fit. Throwing herself into her work, she requested missions immediately upon being processed back into the shinobi program. In addition to receiving standard field missions, Tsubaki threw herself into training, both in the medical field and her other skills. She found that her chakra was aligned primarily to water, and so began chakra nature training exercises to learn to better control water. Might Guy, when available, coached her taijutsu and physical training to improve those aspects of her skill set. She also spent a good deal of time in the shinobi library, pulling what resources she could find to improve her overall chakra control, learn new jutsu, and possibly find an additional element that she could train once she got the hang of her water chakra affinity. This said nothing of her devotion to her medical training, however. She threw herself into it with a vigor that even Sakura Haruno, Tsunade's newest apprentice, hadn't displayed. Shizune was awestruck at the woman's work ethic, having seen that she had somehow crammed and mastered 2 years' worth of medical theory and jutsu training into 8 months. When she had brought Tsubaki's work to Tsunade's attention, Tsunade had approached Tsubaki and offered her additional study material. She also expressed her regrets that she couldn't take Tsubaki on as an apprentice at that time, because one apprentice was already quite a handful, especially on top of being the Hokage. Tsubaki, grateful for anything she could get, jumped at the chance to study Tsunade's material, wrapping her arms around Tsunade on impulse, before remembering herself and sheepishly apologizing. Tsunade waved off her apology, and Tsubaki ended up taking her abilities in medicine and medical ninjutsu to new heights. Tsunade, at first, was ecstatic about Tsubaki's zeal to learn and master the skills she was being taught. Her joy became laced with curiosity as she saw Tsubaki's drive only grow. 2 years into Tsubaki's medical training, the blonde Hokage invited Tsubaki out for a drink again. Once they were at the bar with plenty of sake to go around, Tsunade began the conversation. Well, Tsubaki, I can't recall ever being so impressed with a medical ninjutsu student as I am with you. Even considering that Sakura is learning directly under me, and your studies are mostly self-directed, the fact that your skills as a medic have surpassed Sakura's own is nothing short of spectacular. So what exactly is it that's driven you to work so hard since returning to duty? Naruto Uzumaki, Tsubaki responded without shame or hesitation. Tsunade pondered, intrigued, what about him exactly? Well, he does so much and works so hard for this village, just so that people will acknowledge his existence and treat him with the same respect that the rest of us get as a matter of common courtesy. He deals with so much, and yet he still wants to help others. Iruka Yumino once told me that Naruto has a special ability that allows him to befriend just about anyone he crosses paths with. She trailed off for a brief moment. I can attest to that, firsthand, Tsunade admitted. But then, Tsubaki continued, he also has this strange aura of leadership about him. Tsunade raised an eyebrow at this, prompting Tsubaki to explain, he inspires others to follow him, simply as a byproduct of who he is and the example he sets. He works so hard to protect all of us. I think it's only right that the rest of us do what we can to be in a position to fight alongside and protect him, too. I never really thought of it like that, about the leadership quality, I mean, Tsunade admitted, but you're absolutely right. That is what's been going on with his friends since he left with Jiraiya. I'll tell you, Naruto, he just makes you want to bet on him, you know what I mean. Tsubaki nodded, understanding Tsunade's point. Tsunade quietly noted the expression on Tsubaki's face, it was almost wistful. She was wearing an involuntary smile that gave her a faraway look. Tsunade was even able to note the ever so slight blush on Tsubaki's cheeks, even though she hadn't had that much to drink. She decided not to comment on it, but some part of Tsunade told herself that despite how outlandish it might seem at first glance, this woman that had become her friend in the last 2 or so years would be a good fit for Naruto's life. In what capacity, she couldn't really tell, but she could see that both of them would benefit from knowing each other and being close. So, how close to Naruto are you? Tsunade asked curiously. Actually, I don't really know him on a personal level. We've never actually had a conversation. This surprised Tsunade greatly, and it showed. Then how is it you seem to know him so well? Just keen observation skills, I guess, Tsubaki responded honestly, but the more I think on it, it might be more that I'm looking at what's really there, and not just seeing what I want to see. Her tone took on a slight edge. It frustrates me to no end how blind people can be. I was blind as well, for a long time, but, I don't know, when I looked into his eyes for the first time, I saw a human being there, and a very lonely one at that. Tsunade nodded sadly. I'm ashamed to admit that I didn't even notice that about him until you said something to me that first time we talked. It's funny. I pulled out some pictures that I had of him, and I noticed something. In every picture where he smiles at the camera, his eyes are always closed. It made me think that he's a lot more perceptive than we've ever given him credit for. I always thought it was just him being happy and oblivious, but now, I can't help but wonder if he knew what he was doing in trying to hide his eyes from the world. She trailed off as she reflected on those images. Tsubaki just nodded sadly and sighed, before commenting once more, you know what's funny? Ever since the Chunin exam finals 2 years back, after what I heard him say to Neji Hyuga after beating him, I've been wanting to talk to him and find out more about him. I just want to know who he really is. What stopped you? Tsunade asked, genuinely curious. Circumstances, believe it or not, she said with an ironic chuckle. When I was coming, he was going, or the other way around, and at the times where neither of us was coming or going, it just wouldn't have been appropriate to have such a conversation. I guess I just came to accept the fact that if I want to have that conversation with him, I'll have to be patient and wait for the opportunity to present itself. I suppose so, Tsunade admitted, but I believe your chance will come. I hope so, Tsubaki replied with a smile. I really hope so. I'm home, everyone. Naruto Uzumaki has returned to the Hidden Leaf Village. Could be heard throughout the streets, in Naruto's voice, no less. He's back, Tsubaki asked herself excitedly, snapping her head around to gaze in the direction that the great announcement seemed to originate from. Where is he? What does he look like now? Oh, I have to go see. She wasted no time, taking to the rooftops to quickly find him. After catching sight of him standing atop a post, she gasped. There he was, a good deal taller, and thicker, than when she'd last seen him. And he was wearing the track suit she'd bought him all those years ago, too. She smiled at the sight of his attire, and she couldn't stop the blush creeping across her cheeks at the sight of the boy-turned-man. Naruto, she called out, getting his attention. He smiled as he caught sight of her, jumping off the post onto the nearest roof. He noted that she had discarded the civilian housewife get-up for a much nicer-fitting Leaf Chunin uniform. She landed on the same roof and approached him, smiling and blushing all the while. It's you, Naruto began, as he fumbled around, trying to think of what to say. Hi. Tsubaki giggled. Well, hi, yourself. I see the track suit I bought you fits you rather nicely, now. Naruto gasped with wide eyes as he pointed at her. You're Tsubaki. She nodded. It's nice to officially meet you, Naruto, and I appreciate you remembering my name from just a get-well card. You too, he replied cheerfully, chuckling while scratching the back of his head. I didn't know you were a ninja. Actually, I had retired from service on the night of the Nine Tails attack. My husband was killed, and I was left to raise our daughter by myself. I returned to active duty a few weeks after you left for your trip. Okay, he said, nodding with a smile. So how is your daughter? Her face fell at that. Naruto immediately noticed and offered an apology. I'm sorry, if that's a sore spot for you. No, it's okay. You wouldn't have known. She died in the line of duty 3 years ago. Naruto's own face fell. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, she replied. I actually returned to active duty immediately after I was finished mourning her loss. It just seemed like the right thing to do. It gives me a chance to contribute, and I can also do my part in making sure that what happened to Kasumi doesn't happen to anyone else. Naruto's lips and cheeks crept slowly upward into a warm, genuine smile at that. That's good to hear. I'm glad to know you're making the best of something like that. Tsubaki smiled gratefully and nodded. She then noticed the happy twinkle in his eyes and commented, "You know, you have a very nice smile when you're happy. I hope I get to see that smile more." Now, it was Naruto's turn to blush. Thanks, he chuckled sheepishly. I think that a ninja's uniform definitely suits you more than a housewife's dress does, and I'm glad to see you like this. Naruto's flush grew more pronounced when he realized what his compliment must have sounded like. Tsubaki's own blush deepened at Naruto's clumsy compliment. Seeing that he was about to panic and ask her to excuse his behavior, she responded, "Well, thank you." She had understood what Naruto's intent was, and Naruto seemed to catch that. Both of them stood there, just looking at each other in awkward silence. After a few moments, a third party that Naruto had forgotten all about had broken the silence, both relieving and annoying Naruto at the same time. "Hey, kid, you won't believe who's down below," came Jiraiya's jovial bellow. Naruto turned around to see that Jiraiya had come up to the roof. He also noticed when Jiraiya turned his gaze to Tsubaki. "And who might you be, my dear?" Jiraiya asked, immediately flirting with the honey brown-haired Chunin that had been engaging in conversation with his pupil. "Hello, Master Jiraiya, my name is Tsubaki Kenpi, and I was just welcoming Naruto back from his trip with you," she greeted the man before bowing to him. Jiraiya turned to Naruto and gave a perverted grin, putting his arm around Naruto's shoulders. "Not bad, kid. Not bad at all. This one really is a looker." Naruto began to sputter at Jiraiya's blunt and direct analysis of the situation that he and Tsubaki had entered. Tsubaki, being a tactful woman, replied, "Thank you, Master Jiraiya. It's nice to receive praise from such a prestigious and powerful shinobi as yourself." Naruto's face faltered while Jiraiya's chest seemed to puff out. "Well, of course, I am the man to make all women swoon everywhere," he bellowed with a laugh. Tsubaki seemed to adopt a knowing smirk as she continued, but, as far as male company and companionship goes, she walked over to Naruto, grabbing his arm opposite the side Jiraiya was on and finished, "I'd prefer Naruto here to you." Naruto's face fault became even more pronounced, a tomato red blush now covering his entire face. Jiraiya just gave an agonizing yell and started crying anime tears. After a few moments, both Naruto and Jiraiya recovered. Jiraiya spoke up with a snarky smile. "Well, as much as I would like to leave the two of you alone to continue engaging each other," his smile fell as he became a little more serious. "Naruto, we do need to report back in. Besides, Sakura and Konohamaru are down below waiting for you." Naruto smiled at that, nodding to his master. Turning back to Tsubaki, he took his leave. "Well, Tsubaki, I hope we get to talk more sometime." She smiled and responded with a nod, "I'd like that. How about we get some lunch or something tomorrow?" "Sounds good. You like ramen?" "Yes, I do," she responded with a laugh, "and I can only imagine that you must be biting at the bit for Ichiraku's." "You'd better believe it," he responded. "Tomorrow at lunchtime, then." She nodded. "I'll see you then, and, welcome back, Naruto." "Thanks, Tsubaki. It's good to be back." Naruto jumped down to the street on the side of the building where Sakura and Konohamaru were, while Tsubaki jumped down the other side of the building to the street one block over. Looking at the time, she began to make her way to the hospital to start her shift in half an hour. On her way there, she crossed paths with Abara, who seemed to be shopping and running a few errands. Abara stopped with a double take as she saw her former friend, a woman she hadn't seen since Amy and Kasumi's funeral service. She gaped as she saw Tsubaki, dressed in Chunin attire. "She must not have known that I returned to active service," Tsubaki thought to herself. Tsubaki offered a weak smile and a nod to Abara. Abara, in response, cast her gaze down and slightly away from Tsubaki before turning and going back about her business. Saddened for the woman, Tsubaki continued on her way to the hospital. Naruto couldn't deny that he had changed. He'd had time to think on a few things while he and Jiraiya had been traveling from place to place. He'd had a chance to discuss a lot of life experiences with Jiraiya, who in turn wasn't stingy with him in that department. Both of them were able to laugh with each other at getting tied to the stump at the end of the bell test. Both of them were crushing hard on girls who would beat the crap out of them simply because they were in the mood to, though unlike Naruto, Jiraiya would admit that it was his perverted leers and antics that would bring Tsunade's wrath upon him most of the time. Sakura, on the other hand, would hit Naruto just because she felt he was getting in the way of her pursuit of Sasuke, or he'd just done something to annoy her, whether or not it was actually her concern. The more time away he'd had from the village, the more he was able to see certain people for who, and what, they really were. Sakura hadn't so much as left him a get-well card when he had come back from the Sasuke retrieval mission, and even though she tried to cheer him up while he was there in the room, she had mainly come by to find out the full story of what happened to Sasuke. In contrast, a woman who had only seen him on the street a handful of times not only brought him flowers and a card, but a gift as well. When he had thought of these things, his interest in Sakura started to wane rather quickly. He eventually found himself asking what it was he ever saw in Sakura to begin with. He had grown up. His time with Jiraiya hadn't been without its benefits and lessons. He was able to learn from Jiraiya's own mistakes with Tsunade, as well as from Tsunade's reactions to Jiraiya. Sakura was even more volatile than Tsunade had been, and Naruto came to the conclusion that he would be better off, in many ways, by letting Sakura go. Ironically, he came to that conclusion after he had already let her go unconsciously. These were the things he had pondered on his way to Hokage Tower with Jiraiya and Sakura. After trying to show Konohamaru his latest pervy ninjutsu, Sakura had slugged him once more. Of course, he would admit that he probably asked for that. Still, though, would it be too much to ask that Sakura not hit him hard enough to break his jaw? After all, it wasn't like he was peeking on her in the bathhouse or something. He was broken out of his thoughts as Sakura knocked on Tsunade's office door. The three of them entered when the command was given, and from there, he and Jiraiya gave Tsunade an update on Naruto's training. Tsubaki was waiting for Naruto to show up at Ichiraku's. She had gotten there at 11:30, just half an hour before noon, so that she could be sure she wouldn't miss him. The more she thought about this, though, the more awkward she felt. What would she say to him? What would they have to talk about? Would he even show up? It wasn't like they knew each other, after all. Hey there, Tsubaki heard from behind her. Turning around, she saw Naruto. He came to meet her, after all. He was also wearing that same smile she liked so much yesterday, that genuine smile that showed he was truly happy. She smiled back, both with relief and with happiness that he was there. Hi, she said right back, have a seat. I haven't ordered yet, I was waiting on you to get here. Naruto nodded and took the stool immediately to Tsubaki's left. The two of them exchanged a few pleasantries before Tsuki came to take their orders. As Tsuki saw Naruto, he beamed, hey there, kid. Welcome back. I had no idea that this fine young lady was referring to you when she mentioned she was waiting for someone. You've gotten a good bit bigger since I last saw you. Thanks, old man. I sure did miss your cooking, though. I would have been here last night, but I wanted to be in bed early enough to make sure I'd be here on time after what Kakashi-sensei just put me through. Music to my ears, my boy. So what can I get you? First rounds on the house to welcome back my favorite customer. Both of them ordered miso ramen, Naruto with his usual additions, fish cakes, a boiled egg and extra barbecued pork. As they received their meals, Tsubaki and Naruto found it quite easy to talk to each other. They started with Naruto's second bell test with Kakashi that went well into the wee hours of the morning, and just finished a few hours ago. Tsubaki shared about her return to duty since he had left the village, while Naruto told her about his adventures with Jiraiya while traveling from place to place, many of which seemed to end with the two of them being chased out of town by angry towel-clad females because Jiraiya just couldn't keep himself from doing research. Surprisingly to Naruto, Tsubaki found those particular tales absolutely hilarious, especially when Jiraiya couldn't get away fast enough. After spending time getting to know each other a bit, an Anbu suddenly appeared. Uzumaki, he quickly said, the Hokage requires your presence right away. Naruto, seeing the seriousness of the situation, nodded. The Anbu vanished in a puff of smoke at his response. Naruto turned to Tsubaki and began to explain, but she waved him off before he could say anything. Missions come first. I do understand, she explained reassuringly. Listen, most of my time on duty is spent at the hospital. You know Isako, right? In ICU. Naruto nodded, prompting Tsubaki to continue. She can always tell you where I am. So if you want to drop by and talk some more after you get back from your mission, I'll be waiting for you, okay? Naruto smiled and nodded. Well, gotta run. I'll see you soon, Tsubaki. Looking forward to it. With that, Naruto left the stand and made his way to the Hokage's office at top speed. Naruto was currently in a hospital room with a cast on his arm. From what Tsubaki had been able to gather, Naruto had just finished creating some new super jutsu that had sliced up some of the chakra coils in his arm. They could still be healed, which relieved Tsubaki. She wouldn't want him to lose his ability to mold chakra. It had been, a few months, since they'd had a chance to talk. It was the day after Naruto had gotten back with Master Jiraiya when they'd had lunch. Having just been promoted to Junin, Tsubaki was now taking on more special case patients. When she heard that Naruto had been admitted for observation and for a few checkups on his arm, she jumped at the chance to be his attendant. It would give her a chance to care for him, and also to spend some time with him as well, as he had been going on mission after mission with almost no downtime. Smiling as she entered his room, she greeted him, "Hello Naruto, how are you?" Naruto looked at the woman who had just greeted him with a smile of his own when he saw who it was, Tsubaki. Hi. She was dressed in semi-civilian garb, attire that medics typically wore when not out in the field, and not in surgery. She was dressed in a cream-colored form-fitting blouse with a turtleneck collar over a crimson skirt that ended a few inches above her knees, and high-heeled ninja sandals. Her headband was around her neck, indicating that she was on duty as a ninja. She wore her hair in a ponytail that began at the base of her neck, giving the hair on her head a framing effect around her face, which was highlighted with natural shade eyeshadow and lip gloss of a medium pink. She was the epitome of an attractively dressed professional woman, tasteful, yet slightly provocative. It's good to see you again, Naruto, it's been too long, she began, still smiling, though I do wish that it was under better circumstances. Well, it's always good to see you, he responded, so I'll take whatever circumstances I can get if it gives me a chance to talk to you again. Tsubaki couldn't help but blush at such a declaration. She thanked him shyly as she started making small talk with him, running some scans and performing a routine healing jutsu so that the healing in his arm could be accelerated. She noted an additional injury on his body that wasn't on his chart. She turned to Naruto and indulged her curiosity. Naruto, what is this injury on your head? And why isn't it on your chart, here? Naruto looked at her in confusion. What do you mean? Tsubaki's confusion turned into surprise, though she kept an even tone in her voice. How did you hurt your head? Do you not feel any pain around your head right now? Well, a little. Sakura gave me a knock to my skull when I was in Grandma Tsunade's office, but it's what I normally feel after she does that. Tsubaki's eyes narrowed. Do you know who it was that created this chart? I think Sakura did. Why? Has anyone else besides Sakura seen you or treated you since you were brought here? Well, no. Naruto's confusion seemed to grow at Tsubaki's few moments of thoughtful contemplation. Naruto, Tsubaki broke the silence, her face suddenly adopting a serious expression. I'm going to issue a formal request that Sakura Haruno not be allowed to treat you for the foreseeable future. I need to speak to the Hokage. Whoa, wait a minute. Naruto began, shocked at the brunette medic's admission. Why don't you want Sakura treating me? Because you've sustained injuries that are not listed here on this chart, which means that Sakura either didn't record them when she constructed your chart, or you've sustained them since you were admitted. For a medic to not report such injuries if they are aware of them is unethical and illegal. Naruto just stared at her for a few moments. Tsubaki continued, Naruto, there are signs of blunt force trauma, past and present, to your skull. Your healing ability, thankfully, allows you to recover from injuries of even that severity. Still, though, if it was anyone else, these injuries could have been terminal or even fatal. Naruto's eyes went wide. Sakura's punches to the head were affecting him that badly. He did find that he had trouble thinking or seeing straight for a few days any time after Sakura hit him on the top of his head. And her hits hurt, which was saying something, considering Naruto's tolerance for pain. Naruto, I know you don't want a friend of yours to get into trouble, Tsubaki said, but this has to be reported, it's the law. Naruto, seeing the pretty medic's urgency, pretty. I'll admit, she certainly is, but where'd that come from? Naruto closed his eyes, sighed and nodded. Tsubaki made a few additional notes to the chart at the foot of Naruto's bed and left to find the Hokage. Tsunade frowned in concern, several issues weighing on her mind. The first and foremost was the damage done to Kakuzu's body from the wind style, Rasenshuriken, and the corresponding damage to Naruto's arm. She hoped that Naruto would heed the warnings about using the jutsu unless a way could be found to eliminate the damage to the user. The other issue was Sakura's continual loss of temper with Naruto over nothing. Just because Naruto wasn't paying her as much attention as he used to was not a reason for her to go off on him any time she felt like it. And then to go so far as to hit him simply because he objected to going to the hospital. Most people object to that. It would also seem that Sakura had been making herself a bit scarce when Tsunade would have the time to speak with her about the matter. As it wasn't a matter of critical urgency right now, she would have to let it slide in favor of more urgent and higher priority issues. Lady Tsunade, she heard a familiar female voice ask. She looked up to see a welcome sight. Tsubaki, she said with some relief, it's good to see a friend. Please, come in. Thank you, my lady, Tsubaki responded as she quickly entered and closed the door. Tsubaki briskly made her way to Tsunade's desk, and placed a copy of the chart she had just finished updating in front of Tsunade. Tsunade, I wish this was a friendly visit, but I felt that this was something you'd need to address right away. Tsunade, not used to the urgency in Tsubaki's voice, frowned in confusion. Okay, what is it? This is a copy of Naruto Uzumaki's current chart. Please have a look at it. She gestured to the documents she had laid in front of the older blonde. Tsunade picked it up and started going through it. Her eyes narrowed the more she read. When she was done, she put the chart down and stared hard at Tsubaki. To her surprise, Tsubaki didn't even flinch. Tsubaki, do you mean to tell me with this chart that you believe Sakura Haruno either didn't check Naruto's head for injuries or deliberately left them off of his chart? That's exactly what I mean to tell you, Lady Tsunade, she responded with firm conviction. In fact, I've already placed in a request with Shizune to keep Sakura Haruno from being allowed to treat Naruto for the remainder of his stay in the hospital until we can get to the bottom of this. If injuries of this nature are not on this chart, either she doesn't know what she's doing, or worse, she does. Tsunade's eyes widened at this. Tsubaki, still not done, continued, I'm also requesting that you go to his room and check my findings. I believe I've found something else that I didn't write onto that chart yet because I frankly couldn't believe what I found, so I'd ask if you could go over him as well and see if he has, well, inflammation to his brain. Encephalitis. Tsunade responded, stunned. That's just it. There's no trace of any pathogens that would cause encephalitis in his body, but I'm pretty sure his brain is swollen. The weird thing, though, is that he's not showing any outward symptoms of a closed head injury. At Tsubaki's diagnosis, Tsunade wasted no time. She got up from her desk and headed straight to the hospital. Follow me, she ordered Tsubaki. Tsubaki was on her heels the whole way. Once they got to Naruto's room, there was Naruto, and Sakura was there with him, apparently about to hit him on the head again, with the clipboard that had his chart on it. Freeze where you are, Sakura. Tsunade bellowed out. Sakura, in her surprise, froze in her tracks. What? Sakura asked in her confusion, lowering her arm. Naruto's flinch also relaxed. Tsunade quickly moved around to Naruto's bedside, her hand covered in green medical chakra as she started gently rubbing her palm around his head. Tsubaki followed her in, turning her gaze towards Sakura. What are you doing in this room, Sakura? Tsubaki asked. What do you mean, what am I doing in here? I'm treating my teammate, she responded indignantly. After I found a few discrepancies on his chart, Tsubaki paid attention to Sakura's facial expressions as she was explaining herself. Sakura seemed genuinely confused. I made a formal request to Shizune that you not be allowed in here to treat him. Discrepancies? What discrepancies? I listed every injury that he was admitted for. What about the injuries to his head? Sakura's confusion seemed to grow. What injuries to his head? What in the world are you talking about? Whether you know or not is not the issue right now. You are not authorized to be in this room. Tsubaki informed her firmly. Actually, Sakura, stay for now, but please sit over there, Tsunade instructed, pointing to a chair on the far side of the room while still focusing on scanning Naruto's head. After several minutes, Tsunade was done. You're right, Tsubaki. He does have a closed head injury. Sakura gasped upon hearing this. She brought her hands up to her face in her surprise. Tsubaki turned to the pink-haired girl upon hearing her gasp before turning her attention back to Naruto. Tsunade spoke up once more. Naruto, I'm going to use a technique that should reduce some of the pressure you must be feeling on your head, okay? It'll hurt a bit, but you'll feel a lot better afterwards. Naruto just nodded, trusting the woman to treat him properly. Tsunade performed a few hand seals and the green in her hands seemed to deepen and become a slightly darker shade. She put her hands to Naruto's head. At first, he didn't seem to feel anything different, but after a few seconds, he closed his eyes and began to grit his teeth. Shortly after this, a pained groan made itself known from the back of Naruto's throat. After a couple of minutes of this, Naruto slumped back, completely unconscious. Tsunade ran through a few more techniques, apparently taking care of some of the after effects of her jutsu before performing a final scan. He should be fine. Now, Tsunade breathed out at last. Tsubaki, scan him again, please. Tsubaki followed the blonde's orders, running the scan and confirming Tsunade's findings. She nodded as she finished up. Both of them turned to Sakura. Sakura, Tsunade began, explain yourself. Well, I didn't know he had sustained any injuries to his head, she finally got out. Ball up your fist, please, Tsunade ordered firmly. What? Do it. Okay, Sakura said nervously, balling up her fist and presenting it to Tsunade. Tsunade took a moment to do a few visual measurements on Sakura's closed fist. Once she was done, Tsunade explained somewhat darkly, the size and indentations of your fist match many of the injuries to Naruto's head, Sakura. You're apparently the one who gave him that injury, and some of his other past injuries as well. Sakura gasped once more, tears beginning to well into her eyes. She turned her gaze to him, looking forlorn. I didn't know. Sakura, I can only hope that's the honest truth, because I'd hate to think what it meant if you did know, Tsunade said, her tone leaving no room for excuse on Sakura's part, but regardless of whether or not you knew about that, what excuse do you have for violating protocol and coming into this room when instructions were clearly given for you not to? I just wanted to see my friend. Your friend? Do you give head injuries to all your friends? You knew that you were not to come in here, did you not? Tsubaki interrupted as she became agitated. Sakura nodded to Tsubaki. Sakura, Tsunade brought the girl's attention back to herself, as I don't believe you honestly meant Naruto any harm, I'll be lenient as far as a penalty goes. But you need to understand something. Your actions here today, and your negligence concerning all of Naruto's injuries can be considered gross medical malpractice. I'll allow you to keep your rank and continue working as a medic, but as of now, your apprenticeship under me is over. Sakura gasped once more as tears began to freely flow. Please, Lady Tsunade, not that. Would you rather I send you to prison? Tsunade interrupted, causing Sakura to go wide-eyed, because that's the due penalty for this. After a few moments' pause, Tsunade continued, Sakura, I have never condoned your overly volatile and abusive treatment of Naruto. Granted, I know I've hit Jiraiya in the past, and there was the one time that I beat him to near death for being a perverted lecher. But that one time, I regretted it, I still regret it to this day. I went too far, and you've never seen me hit him since, nor will you. You, on the other hand, have hit Naruto simply because you were annoyed with him, which is one issue in and of itself, but because you know my super strength technique, that makes you a clear and present danger to his life and health. Sakura seemed to shrink in on herself at her master's harsh rebuke. Tsunade continued, as I said, Sakura, your apprenticeship with me is over. And if I ever hear of you hitting Naruto again, especially around the head, the day I hear of that will be the day that your career as both a medic and as a ninja end, too. Am I understood? Sakura could do not but hang her head in shame. Yes, Lady Tsunade. Good. Now leave this room and do not come back in for the remainder of Naruto's stay here. Sakura simply nodded before slowly leaving the room. Tsunade could only look on in angry disappointment. Tsubaki honestly didn't know what to say. After a few minutes, Tsunade began to shed a few tears of her own and hang her head, shaking it back and forth. I didn't imagine in a million years that this would happen. I didn't imagine that she'd take after my own failings like this, she said quietly. Tsubaki sighed, Lady Tsunade, I'm sorry about all of this. No, you have nothing to apologize for, you did the right and ethical thing by bringing this to my attention, Tsubaki. Thank you. You're welcome, and I promise that Naruto will get well quickly while he's under my care, here. Tsunade turned to Tsubaki for a moment before smiling with narrow eyes and asking slyly, you have a soft spot for Naruto, don't you? Tsubaki blushed a deep red suddenly, beginning to sputter. As she realized she was busted, she calmed down and nodded, yeah, maybe a little. Tsunade laughed before her smile softened and gestured to the woman, I don't think so, you've got more than a little soft spot for him. Tell you what. You can tell me all about it over sake tonight. Tsubaki laughed, deal. Both of them left Naruto's room, allowing him some much-needed rest. By the way, Tsunade added as they both walked down the hall, it looks like I'll need a new apprentice now. Interested? Being Tsunade's apprentice certainly wasn't easy. Tsubaki was training day in and day out with Tsunade whenever time permitted. Tsunade was amazed once more at how Tsubaki took to her master's teachings like a fish to water, approaching them with a drive that even Sakura had failed to show. Her medical jutsu were already top-notch, and the advanced chakra control exercises that Tsunade had shown her brought her already stellar chakra control to new heights. Tsubaki also started serving as Tsunade's assistant when Shizune was unavailable, or out on a mission. Tsunade looked forward to these times, as while Shizune would always take away Tsunade's precious sake, Tsubaki would usually drink with her. Of course, she'd make sure that Tsunade drank in moderation while on duty, as she herself would, but being the Hokage was stressful. There were days when Tsunade quite frankly needed a drink or 10, especially with what Homura, Kaharu and Danzo put the poor woman through. Thinking of those three always put Tsubaki on edge. She had once nearly lost her temper with all of them and was about to show them her newfound prowess with Tsunade's super strength technique, but fortunately, it turned out not to be necessary. The elders also learned to stay away from Tsunade's office unless it was a matter that could not wait, as unlike Shizune, Tsubaki wasn't intimidated by them in the least. They weren't getting to Tsunade if they didn't absolutely need to, not on her watch. Once Shizune and team had returned from the mission to retrieve and seal the three-tailed turtle, with no turtle to show for all of their efforts, Tsubaki spent that night commiserating with Tsunade over the full onslaught of the elders that Shizune certainly stood no chance against. It had been a wonderfully miserable night of getting completely trashed and forgetting, at least until the next morning, to be painfully reminded not only by circumstances but by their hangovers as well. Naruto had also returned with the sealing team, but was sent out almost immediately afterwards once intel had been received that Orochimaru had been killed by Sasuke Uchiha. He had been given a mission to find and capture Itachi Uchiha, who had been spotted in the Land of Fire. It was also during this time that Jiraiya had gone to the village hidden in the rain. Tsunade had had a horrible, sinking feeling in her gut when Jiraiya left, and she immediately went to Tsubaki's home. Tsubaki, who hadn't ever seen Tsunade in such a state, elected to allow her to come into her home and do their drinking there. Tsunade was in tears about it all, meanwhile all Tsubaki could do was hug the woman. Their drinking that night consisted more of tea than sake. How did we develop such a kinship with each other? Tsubaki thought offhand. She was certainly my hero growing up, but it's amazing how we've become such great friends. What makes her trust me so much? Deciding to voice her thoughts once Tsunade had calmed down and was content again, she asked, Tsunade. Just curious, how did we become such great friends in so short a time? I mean, why do you trust me so much? Tsunade, without missing a beat, answered, I honestly think you're the most objective person I've ever met in this village, Tsubaki. That's at least what makes me trust you as much as I do. What makes you say that? Your opinion of Naruto and how you formed it, for one. Of all the people I've ever spoken to in this village, you're the only person besides Tyuki and Ayame Ichiraku who have ever taken a fair, objective look at him. It's funny, Shizune did, too when we first met him. Tsubaki simply nodded, listening to her mentor and friend while Tsunade told her the story of how she first met Naruto. They spent their evening exchanging stories about Naruto, some of which had been told before, some of which had not. After Tsunade had crashed there for the evening, they both continued the next day as they usually would, in slightly better spirits than they would have otherwise been. Naruto and team had just gotten back from the mission to capture and retrieve Itachi Uchiha. They came up with nothing. Apparently, Itachi had been killed by Sasuke by the time they got there, and blood stains were the only evidence of the battle that had taken place. That wasn't the main issue that was bothering Tsubaki at the moment. What was bothering Tsubaki was how Naruto would take the news about Jiraiya's being killed in the hidden rain. He didn't take it well. Tsubaki received the news from Shizune as to what had taken place in Tsunade's office. The woman knew that Tsunade would probably want to be left alone right now. If she wanted company, she'd seek it out. She also knew that Tsunade would be alright. It was Naruto that she was worried about right now. As soon as her shift ended, she began her search for him. It was late, the sun had long since set. She couldn't find him in any of his normal haunts. He wasn't at Ichiraku's, he wasn't on the Hokage monument, he wasn't even at home. Where was he? She continued searching. She had to find him. After several hours of continuous searching, she had become too tired to continue her search. She would rest and try again tomorrow. She chanced by a convenience store, and caught a glimpse of orange out of the corner of her eye. Turning her gaze in the direction of the orange, she saw him, and the state that he was in caused her stomach to clench and her heart to break. There he was, sitting on a bench in a slumped-over position. Tears were streaming down his face. He wasn't wearing his jacket. He was in his orange track-suit pants and a black t-shirt. He was just staring at the ground, oblivious to any and all around him. In his hand was a double-stick popsicle, melting and dripping onto the street below. he hadn't made any attempt to eat it. Tsubaki felt her own tears begin to form. She walked over to him slowly. He hadn't noticed her at all. Once she reached him, she knelt down and took his free hand in both of her own. This got his attention, as he brought his gaze up to look the woman in the eye. "Tsubaki," he muttered, surprised to see her. She moved to sit beside him on the bench. Once she was situated, not having let go of his hand, she said softly through her tears, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Naruto just sat there for a few moments, not knowing what to say. In his discomfort, he began to put on his goofy facade with closed eyes and make light of his feelings. "Ah, it's okay, Tsubaki, I'm fine." Tsubaki interrupted him by bringing a hand up to his face and gently resting it there, causing his eyes to snap open and his grin to turn into a half gape. "Naruto, please," she began, "don't do this to yourself." Her voice began to break as she continued, "And please don't do that to me, either." Naruto just sat there, staring wide-eyed at the woman who was breaking through his emotional defenses. He turned his head away while averting his gaze from hers. Tsubaki, however, brought the hand that was on his cheek to his chin and gently turned his gaze back to her own. Seeing that she had his full attention again, she smiled softly through her tears, brought her hand back up to his cheek, and gently addressed him, "It's all right." Naruto seemed to wrestle with what to do. He wasn't sure how to respond to this woman that could worm her way through his barriers in a way nobody else had ever been able to do. As his eyes flitted this way and that, Tsubaki leaned in and kissed Naruto on his other cheek, bringing his attention back to her and stopping his panicked fidgeting. After lingering there for a few seconds, she pulled back and stared into his eyes again. Smiling just as softly, her eyes flowing with even more tears than before, she told him once more, this time a little more urgently, "It's all right." Feeling his barriers begin to break even further, and panic begin to arise anew, Naruto closed his eyes and forcibly wrenched his gaze and his head away from her. Tsubaki, however, would have none of that. She let go of his hand and brought both hands up to his cheeks. Cupping his face in her hands, she gently yet forcibly brought his face back around to meet hers as she threw herself forward while pulling him towards her, smashing her lips into his own. Naruto froze, his eyes as wide as dinner plates. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he noted that he had allowed the popsicle to drop from his hand. He gasped as he felt the woman's tongue snake into his mouth. As Naruto's own tongue instinctively danced with hers, he could feel one of her hands making its way to the back of his head with a looser grip on him. Tsubaki's sobs could be heard through her kiss, and somehow Naruto knew what she was trying to tell him. This kiss was not only a show of affection and an attempt at comfort, but a plea to let her in, into his heart, into his thoughts, and at least right now, into his life. Tsubaki finally pulled away slowly, tears still streaming down her face. Naruto just looked on, stunned, confused, yet still shedding silent tears. Tsubaki started gently stroking his face with the hand that was still on his cheek. "It's all right, Naruto, it's all right," she said once more, this time her tone a pleading one. Naruto understood her words, now. She wanted him to know that he was safe with her. It was all right for him to let his walls down and be who he really was, to express and let out what he really felt. It was all right for him to grieve the way he needed to grieve, and to allow this woman to support and comfort him through it. So many things went through Naruto's mind at that point. Why was this beautiful, precious creature going so far out of her way to help him? What about him made her think he was worth her while? What was it about her that she seemed to know him well enough to get to his fragile, wounded heart? The answer came as quickly as the questions did. She knew because she could relate. He wasn't sure about the recognition she always seemed to show him before, but right now, he knew where she could relate to him. She'd lost her daughter, the closest person to her as well. Right now, she knew exactly how he felt. She also knew exactly what he needed to be able to do to work his way through this, as well. Unable to hold back the torrent of feelings any longer, he began to break down and lean into her, sobs forcing themselves up from his throat. She brought him into a warm, tight, comforting embrace, kissing the side of his face that was next to hers while doing so and sobbing with him. It's all right, she whispered to him softly as he began to bawl and wail, wrapping his own arms around her and clinging to her as though his life depended on it. She never imagined she would hear such heart-wrenching cries from this man. This seemingly unbreakable spirit. Even when the third had died, Naruto's reaction wasn't anything like this. She just let him cry into her. She sat there as he sobbed into first her shoulder, and then into her blouse-clad bosom. She held him there, whispering sweet words of comfort to him, crying with him as he let out the anguish and grief that was almost overwhelming him. After an indeterminate amount of time, Naruto had cried himself out. He got up off the woman, noting where he was. He looked at her slowly, seeing her own tear-stained, puffy face and laughing sheepishly. Sorry, Naruto, it's all right, she interrupted gently, her own tears not having stopped yet. Naruto, not knowing what to make of her expression, tried to excuse himself. Well, I appreciate what you just did for me. I guess I should be getting home now. No, Tsubaki said forcefully, grabbing his hand before he could leave. Naruto, I'm not leaving you alone, tonight. Naruto frowned in confusion at her. Come with me, Tsubaki gently ordered, standing up and leading him by the hand. Too tired to argue, Naruto allowed himself to be pulled along by Tsubaki. After pulling him into the streets, Tsubaki pulled him into another quick hug and used Shunshin to teleport back to her apartment. When they reappeared, Naruto took a few seconds to get his bearings and acquaint himself to his location. He could see the Hokage Tower close by, off to the right of what he guessed was Tsubaki's apartment building, letting him know where he was. Tsubaki quickly unlocked her apartment and led Naruto inside. After seeing her close and lock her front door, Naruto voiced his confusion. Tsubaki, not that I mind, but why have you brought me here? Because you don't need to be by yourself right now. Please, just take the word of someone who knows, she pleaded with him softly yet urgently. She then went through what Naruto guessed was her routine for when she arrived home after a hard day at work, removing her sandals, checking for messages delivered while she was out, and various other mundane tasks. Make yourself at home, okay? I'll be done in a few minutes, she offered. Naruto sighed and nodded, seating himself down on one of her couches in her living room. Not knowing what to do or say, he settled for leaning his head back against the back of the couch, closing his eyes. His mind's eye flooded his thoughts with images of Jiraiya, times they'd laughed together, special moments they'd experienced during their training trip, times when they both had to flee for their lives from righteously angry women that the pervert had peeked on, as all the while Jiraiya shouted that he regretted nothing. Naruto's memories seemed to fixate on the times when Jiraiya had bought and shared double-stick popsicles with him. Tears once again came unbidden to Naruto's eyes as a few sobs escaped his throat once more. After a few moments of this, a soft hand to his face caused him to open his eyes once more. His gaze fell upon Tsubaki, who had come over to him once she'd heard his sobs again. While no longer in tears the way he was, her eyes were still filled with a knowing pain for him. She took both of his hands in hers and pulled. Naruto stood up and allowed him to lead her through her apartment through a hallway and into a door. When Naruto saw a queen-sized bed, his eyes went wide as he turned his gaze to her. She gently turned him around so that he was now walking backwards, and instead of pulling him, she was now gently pushing him into her bedroom, closing the door behind her. Tsubaki, Naruto began, only to be interrupted by her raising a finger to his lips, followed by a gentle kiss. That kiss was followed by several more, and within a few moments, Tsubaki was working Naruto's shirt off of his body. Is this a good idea? Naruto barely whispered out, unable to process how he should react, tears still flowing from his eyes in the grief that his memories of Jiraiya brought on. Not important right now, Tsubaki answered as she proceeded kissing him once more while lifting his shirt off of him. It wasn't long before both of them were in nothing but their undergarments. Naruto was still shedding tears, while Tsubaki was running her hands all over Naruto's exposed upper body. Her kisses, while still gentle, had turned from chaste to passionate as she began using her tongue to play with his own once more. Just let go, Naruto, I've invited you into my home, she spoke between kisses as she gently pushed Naruto onto her bed. I've invited you into my bed. Please, let me comfort you tonight. Tsubaki removed her bra and panties slowly, exposing her body to Naruto. Naruto, no longer able to think straight with the tempest of emotions raging through him, relented to her request and removed his boxers. Despite both of them being completely exposed before each other, they hadn't broken eye contact. Tender, caring chocolate brown eyes stared into dazzling electric blue pools. Tsubaki got into the bed on her knees, and slowly moved to straddle the blonde as he sat with his back against the headboard. Tsubaki's hands continued exploring his body as she looked deep into his eyes and continued kissing him lovingly. Naruto began to kiss her in turn. After a few moments, he pulled back and drank in her beautiful form, his hands apprehensively reaching out to touch her. She took his hands in her own, bringing his gaze back to her face. The warmth and acceptance that he saw in her sparkling brown pools caused his apprehension to melt away. She brought his hands to her thighs and began to guide them across her skin, up her legs, over her hips and rear, and upwards, around her back, over her sides and towards her front, bringing them to stop on her supple. She leaned in and began to kiss him again. After a few moments, she opened her eyes to look at him once more, and seeing his nervousness, she asked softly, "Are you all right?" I don't know," he admitted honestly. Naruto, she brought a hand up to his face and began to stroke his cheek again. "This is all for you. We don't have to do anything that you're uncomfortable with, okay? I know that this must be confusing, but I want you to understand. This is an act of comfort and love, okay? You're not obligated to do this now, and I'm not going to hold you to anything in the future as a result of what does or doesn't happen here tonight. Do you understand?" Naruto's breathing and pulse began to quicken as he saw the love and sincerity that her eyes presented to him. He nodded in response to her question as he slowly leaned up towards her face and kissed her just as gently and as passionately as she had done to him. After a few minutes, he leaned back and continued looking into her eyes, his hands never having left her the entire time. "Are you all right with this? Are you willing to trust me?" Tsubaki asked gently. Naruto smiled as warmly as he could and nodded slowly. Tsubaki thought it best to keep things simple tonight, given Naruto's evident lack of experience with intimacy and the turbulent instability of the emotional roller coaster that the next few days were sure to be for him. Without saying another word, she got off him and rolled over to the nightstand on her side of the bed. Opening the drawer, she pulled out a bottle that Naruto saw was labeled as lubricant before closing it. Opening the bottle and putting some of the slick, oily fluid into her right hand, she reached down to his hard shaft and began to apply it slowly and gently, rubbing her hand and fingers up and down, making sure she covered it all. His twitches at the contact of her warm, soft hand were not lost on Tsubaki, and neither were the involuntary moans that escaped him every few seconds. She smiled as she thought about how good this would feel for him. Once she saw that his manhood was sufficiently lubricated to provide comfortable entry into her canal, she straddled the blonde youth once more, lining his tip to her entrance. Scooting forward slightly, she kissed him once more as she gently lowered herself onto him, bringing gasps from both of them as they became one. Tsubaki leaned into Naruto, wrapping her arms around him, one around his back, the other around his neck, holding his head to her shoulder. Naruto's hands came forward and snaked their way around her back, holding her to him while gently caressing the velvety flesh of the brunette's back, occasionally strumming his fingers through her silky honey-colored locks. She started kissing him once more as she began to slowly move up and down upon his shaft. Not a word was said between the two. The only sounds that came forth from them were gasps and moans that were soft and sensual, their coupling a slow, sensual, intimate dance instead of a fast romp. Tears began to come forth from Naruto's eyes yet again. This time, he wasn't sure why. Tsubaki seemed to understand as she smiled at him, bring the hand around his head towards his face, kissing him as she continued her slow steady rise and fall, moving every so often to kiss the tears off of his face. After a few minutes, Naruto's hands went from her back to her glutes as he instinctively began to guide her up and down motions with his hands, lifting and relaxing in time with her own bounces onto his member. Before long, Naruto's impending climax made itself known as his moans became louder. Tsubaki, sensing his impending release, leaned more tightly into him, holding him more tightly to herself. Naruto yelled in a groan from the back of his throat as he ejaculated into Tsubaki's womb, the feel of Naruto's seed filling her triggering her own climax as she yelled out in release, soaking Naruto's groin with her own juices. End. Both of them took a few moments to recover, spent from the act they had just engaged in. They held each other tightly for a few minutes as they came back down, Tsubaki kissing him softly all the while, before she slowly separated herself from Naruto. She got out of the bed and pulled him out as well before moving to get the covers stained with their fluids off of the bed. She took the sopping linens and blankets and placed them into a hamper before retrieving fresh bedding from her closet and redressing the bed. After the bed was remade, she pulled back the covers and got under them, gently taking Naruto's hand and pulling him into the bed with her. "Are you all right, honey?" she asked once he was situated, stroking his face and hair once more, giving him a gentle, loving smile. "Yeah, I am. I think I'm okay, at least for now," he responded, smiling back, though a few tears still continued to flow down his face. "Let's just go to sleep for now. It's been a long day, and we can talk more in the morning," Tsubaki suggested. Naruto nodded, and reached around to the lamp on the nightstand at his side of the bed, turning it off and laying down on his back. Tsubaki leaned into his side, draping her leg over his own and laying her head and hand on his chest. "Good night, sweetheart," she whispered softly, kissing his chest. "Good night, princess," he whispered back, bringing an arm around her and holding her more closely to himself. Both of them drifted off into a peaceful slumber, seemingly given a reprieve from life's current troubles.